Chapter 1507. Su Fengnian's existence was like a reef in a river. Although it stirred up huge waves, it couldn't stop the surging torrent. On the battlefield north of Huda's city, the cavalry on both sides of the infantry phalanx had already suppressed the enemy with several rounds of projectile shots. The shield-wielding infantrymen at the head of the tide raised their shields outside the city. The archers at the back braved the rain of arrows from the city and launched the first wave of projectile shots, while the shield-wielding infantrymen and archers were attacking and defending. The scaling ladders and towers suddenly sped up in the gaps between the phalanx. While the latter attracted the attention of the Bailiang's crossbows, the archers under the cover of the shield-wielding infantrymen didn't stop shooting. More Beimang soldiers, who acted as men of sacrifice, began to run wildly. They didn't wear heavy iron armor, only lighter leather armor. They held a shield in one hand and a saber in the other. These men of sacrifice, who had been conserving their energy during the advance of the phalanx, began to charge forward when they were 150 steps away from the city. They would play the most bloody role in the history of war. Almost at the same time, nearly 100 scaling ladders raised high by the Beimang soldiers were placed in the gaps between the battlements. As the name suggested, the 10 or so towers, which were almost as tall as the city, formed a pattern of confrontation with the city after they stopped. At this time, they seemed to show their ferocious faces. The thick cowhide, which was called a mask by the remnants of the southern dynasties of Beimang, was suddenly torn off. The archers hiding in the towers were all great archers of the grassland. Compared to the archers who created the rain of arrows behind the shield-wielding infantrymen, their accuracy was far better. They wanted to kill as many soldiers of Huda's city who could hide in their blind spots as possible. Between the towers, the scaling ladders with iron hooks at the top were like maggots in tarsal bones, biting the body of the giant of the northwest border, Huda's city. At the same time, the ordinary soldiers who pushed the scaling ladders first began to climb the ladders with their shields. The shields in their hands were smaller than those of the shield-wielding infantrymen, but they were sturdier than the men of sacrifice who had followed them to the city. These soldiers' duty was to open a path for the men of sacrifice behind them. They didn't expect them to be able to reach the top of the city, so they simply didn't hold any weapons. They were purely using their flesh and blood, and even their lives in exchange for that little bit of height. In the distance, a group of elite cavalry appeared beside Dongjua. Their iron armor was particularly bright, but it wasn't flashy. Each of them had a big bow, a light crossbow, and a saber. There was an iron spear hanging on the side of the saddle. They were the elite guards of the Beimang royal court, Yelu and Muron. They were the iron guards of Xianxia, the iron guards of Shui, the elite guards of Bimortal's royal families. The only heavy cavalry of Beimang that had never appeared in the world was selected from the Xianxia guards. From this, it could be seen that Beimang relied heavily on this army. 200 Xianxia guards surrounded a young man and woman. The man was wearing a light yellow boa suit. He was born with a rough appearance, but he seemed to be ill. His face was pale, and he sat on the back of a Fergana horse. He was slightly bent and seemed to be restrained. On the other hand, the graceful and generous woman beside him seemed to be more adapted to the atmosphere of the battlefield than her man. She squinted her eyes and looked in the direction of the city wall. Occasionally, she would retract her gaze and look at the figure that was constantly breaking the formation and getting closer and closer. She exuded a deep and gloomy aura. In her chess and sword music school, except for Tai Pingling, who was still the emperor's tutor, and Hong Jingyan, who was fighting at the mouth of the gourd, there were a few other famous poets. The ancestor of bronze men was missing. The great music school had died in battle, and Huang Qing, who was close to the sword Qi, had also died. Therefore, as the famous poet of the chess and sword music school, Han Gu, she, who had always been regarded as the graceful crown princess of Beimang, had almost forced her man to come here. She wanted to see with her own eyes the culprit that could cause the collapse of half of her sect. The crown prince of Beimang, Yelu Hongkai, whispered, "King of the South Courtyard, that guy is still breaking the formation and coming here. Should we retreat a little later?" Dongzhuo chuckled and didn't say anything. Fatty Dong's wife, the fifth fox, frowned. In the past, she had heard from the woman who always competed with her for the title of first wife that Yelu Honkai seemed to have been scared out of his wits when he was young. Now, he looked 70 to 80% similar to the late emperor, but his boldness was lacking. He even fainted at the sight of blood. Every time he went on a hunting trip with the empress, he could only rely on the prey that his personal guard, Xie caught to get by. The fifth fox quickly felt relieved. If Yelu Honkai was as talented and astute as his father, he would have died a long time ago, just like many other Yelu descendants. Yelu Honkai probably realized that his proposal was somewhat inappropriate, so he quickly found a way out for himself. He pretended to be calm and said, "King of the South Courtyard, aren't we waiting for the military god? The deeper the king of Beimang breaks through the formation, the more energy he will need. If our position is too close to the front, won't that Su guy immediately run into a wall and retreat? When the time comes, the one surnamed Su will suffer and hide in Tiger Head City without coming out. Wouldn't that ruin the South Courtyard King's plan?" Dongzhuo finally turned his head slowly and looked at the burly man with the most distinguished status in Beimang. He smiled and said, "Your Highness is right. Luring the enemy deep into the enemy's territory with a deep understanding of the art of war is also good. Let's do as Your Highness says. How about we retreat 500 steps?" Yelu Honkai whispered, "Will 800 steps be safer?" Dongzhuo laughed and said, "Whatever Your Highness says." Dong family's personal army and the Crown Prince's cowardly Shui iron guards began to withdraw. Those hidden experts and archiballista formations also began to move. Yelu Honkai immediately smiled widely, even his waist subconsciously straightening a bit. It was unknown if this Crown Prince, who was like a puppet in Beimang's imperial court, was rejoicing that he escaped danger, or if he was enjoying the great sense of accomplishment brought by Fatty Dong's respect. Yelu Honkai reined in his horse and turned around. When he was about to raise his whip in high spirits, he suddenly heard Dongzhuo cough a few times from beside him. The Crown Prince stared at this king of the South Courtyard in confusion, his face full of confusion. Fatty Dong secretly moved his chin. Only now did Yelu Honkai notice that his wife was still standing in place, having no intention of retreating with him at all. This Beimang Crown Prince, who didn't have any news of accomplishments in Liang's royal court, released a light sigh, indicating for the cowardly Shui iron guards to continue forward. He turned his horse around alone and arrived at her side, gently asking, "What's wrong?" She raised her horsewhip, pointing it in Tiger Head City's direction, coldly saying, "On that battlefield, my tens of thousands of great Mang men are all heading to their deaths." Yelu Honkai reached out his hand to rub his chin, nodding and saying, "Indeed, Beiliang indeed dares to fight, but when have my grasslands warriors ever feared death?" She slowly turned around, looking at this man who had slept on the same bed as her for many years, her eyes full of anger and sorrow for his misfortune. At the same time, her limpid eyes seemed to be asking this man who was the future lord of the grassland. The grassland's men didn't fear death, to the extent where even the king of Beiliang dared to personally charge into battle. Then what about you, Yelu Honkai? Yelu Honkai didn't seem to dare look the Crown Prince's wife in the eye, lowering his head and saying, "Let's go." She lowered her horsewhip, saying with a sneer, "How can retreating 800 steps be enough? It's better if we directly return to Shijing." After turning around, she took the lead to head north, leaving behind a cloud of dust. Yelu Honkai looked at her rear figure, his lips moving slightly, but in the end, he still didn't release any sound. Behind this couple, further south of that lone figure, a great battle was raging in Huda City. Huda City's unparalleled and sturdy defense line was a line that separated the living and the dead. On the northern defense line, the city wall was 15 feet tall. The top part of the wall was filled with mortar mixed with tung oil, glutinous rice, and lime. Just this part alone could be more than 10 feet tall, and 7 layers of bricks were added to it. On the city wall, other than the main arrow tower above the main gate, there were 12 piers, 8 large crossbows, and 2 turrets built on the east and west sections. The Bailiang Frontier Army had battlements and parapets on both sides of the city wall, which was known as the Horse Path. There were more than 2,000 arrow stacks in Huda City that could be used for archery and observation. Every brick in this city, located in the extreme northwest of the Liang dynasty, had a seal on it, clearly indicating the era, the kiln, and the name of the craftsman to prevent the craftsman from dereliction of duty. In the northern direction of Huda City, there were 3 gates: the main gate, the arrow tower, and the gatehouse. Lu Jinu, the commanding general of Huda City, stood on the top of the tallest arrow tower, overlooking the entire city from above. This was because Hong Jia, who had brought many scholars and craftsmen to Beimang, had rushed north. In the history of warfare, there had never been a time when a nomadic tribe had attacked a city in such a high level, overshadowing many local dynasties in the Central Plains in history. More importantly, Beimang had never been so determined to abandon their horses, and they were still so fearless even after dismounting to fight. Huta City claimed to have the richest and most complete stockpile in the Liang dynasty, and it was also Bailiang's largest stockpile of weapons. However, in less than 2 months of defense, more than 4,000 crossbows have been damaged. Half of the crossbow platforms have been destroyed, and more than 20 winches used to store and store battle equipment had been destroyed. As a result, Huta City had to replace the greatly reduced power of the brick and clay battle equipment. More than half of Northern Mang's 1,000 or so death-sworn soldiers who made it up the city walls were either injured or killed. Even though there were more than 10 death-sworn soldiers who made it up the city walls, in the end, they still couldn't gain a firm footing. Below the city walls, there were layers upon layers of corpses and wounded soldiers who couldn't be dragged out of the battlefield in time. The former were silent, while the latter howled in grief. Their casualties, apart from the arrows that poured down from above, could also be caused by a country's pot of boiling oil, rolling batons, or even batons similar to those used by Navy ships. A single strike from these batons could instantly shatter an entire cloud ladder. Meanwhile, the Northern Mang's strong soldiers who climbed up the cloud ladders were as weak as mosquitoes, killed on the city walls with a single strike. Chapter 1508. Compared with the bravery of the men of sacrifice on the ladder, the Beimang archers in the giant towers outside the city caused significant damage to the defenders of Tiger Head City. Compared with the Beimang soldiers who had to pay the price of less heavy armor in order to climb up the city quickly, the Bailiang Frontier Army's armors were tougher and sturdier. Earlier, the archers of the Beimang's 2 flanks and the archers behind the shield soldiers seemed to be dense, but they could not cause any real damage unless they hit the vital parts. However, the Beimang's arrows could almost be called a face-to-face, close-range shooting, especially when they were all excellent archers. One by one, the defenders of Tiger Head City had their throats and eyes pierced through. Many Bailiang soldiers even had their armors pierced through on the spot. The ladders in the infantry phalanx were constantly placed on top of the city wall. After more than 1,000 light-armored men of sacrifice opened a path for the rear to buy time, Beimang would not give Tiger Head City any chance to breathe. Soon, the strong men of Beimang, wearing iron helmets and chain armor, began to climb up the tower. If the first batch of men of sacrifice were all agile Beimang infantry, then this batch of strong men of sacrifice could be said to be comparable to the heavy infantry of the Central Plains who had almost destroyed the cavalry in history if they put on real heavy armor. When these strong men climbed up the city wall, even if the arrows shot down from the top of the city wall were close at hand, they only paused for a moment with their shields raised. Occasionally, a powerful Bailiang archer would shoot an arrow through the shield and the sharp arrowhead directly into the arm, but they would never flinch. In the deafening sound of fighting, a Beimang man climbing up the tower had 4 or 5 arrows nailed into the shield on top of his head. He was in the prime of his life, a man from a small tribe on the northern grassland. For him, there was no royal court or Aquarius state. This time, he followed the army to the south only because he wanted to accumulate enough military merits before winter this year, so that his son, who was growing up, could have enough meat to eat and be promoted by 1 level with him. He hoped that his son could walk out of the unpredictable grassland in the future and have a chance to go to the central plains of Liang on his behalf. As for himself, he did not expect to leave the battlefield alive. This Tiger Head city was too hard to shake, which was very different from the rumors when he joined the army. However, he was not annoyed because he was deceived. Even if he died in the battle, the pension would be enough for his son to grow up and let his son grow into a grassland man who was not inferior to him. Out of the corner of his eye, the strong man wearing iron armor and a shield on top of his head saw that a tower opposite the city wall was heavily smashed down by a baton. The tower shook violently, and the top of the tower was smashed into pieces. More than a dozen master archers were killed on the spot and merged into the tower like meat paste. He breathed heavily, gritted his teeth, and continued to climb up. Then, he left the ladder in an instant. Not only him, but 3 or 4 strong men behind him also met the same fate. His heart immediately turned to ashes. Immediately afterwards, he and several other Beimang strong men's backs smashed into the city wall near the ladder at almost the same time. They were like a bunch of pitiful grasshoppers that were strung up by ropes. The man who fell until he was completely dizzy held his shield tightly, raising his arm to block above his head. Sure enough, immediately afterwards, there were light crossbows that shot down from above the city wall. He who temporarily escaped this disaster knew that the true danger was still to come. Their group had their armors hooked by Beiliang's flying owls. This type of weapon used specifically to deal with Great Mang's strong men was a 7-zhang long iron chain. There were sharp flying hooks nailed to the iron chain every 3 feet. Once the latter armored soldiers were hooked, they wouldn't be able to control themselves, quickly being dragged up. What welcomed them were spears one after another. He had personally seen many strong men die miserably under these flying owls. If he hurriedly removed his armor at this time, try to escape by jumping off the city wall, it wouldn't be realistic at all. He who was suspended at the very top of the iron chain lowered his head, roaring angrily, "Hold the war blade tightly." This iron chain flying owl was pulled back by several Beiliang soldiers. The 4 Beimang strong men's iron armor grinded against the walls, releasing chi-chi noises. Out of the 4 of them, he was the first to climb up to the top of the city wall. His mind was blank. He instinctively turned around and faced the top of the city wall. After he was pulled out of the city wall, he held his shield in front of him. Instantly, his shield was hit by a spear and smashed in his chest. However, when he tried to swing his saber randomly, a northern Liang guard on the city wall wielding a strange straight saber smashed into his head. Blood splattered everywhere, and he died on the spot. As for the 3 strong men who were dragged onto the city wall after his death, they either died under this type of axe or spear. Their corpses were removed from the flying owl and then casually pushed off the city wall. Then, that flying owl was flung off the city wall again. On Tiger Head City's battlefront, one side was like ants, the other side was like ants. Both sides' lives truly were like ants. Su Fengyan, who was deep in enemy territory, continued forward, unstoppable like a hot knife through butter. He swept through everything before him, no one able to withstand a single blow. However, Su Fengyan could clearly feel a few balls of dense energy following him. These people were undoubtedly Beimang martial path experts who were waiting for a chance to strike. Most of them were at Master Realm. Further away, 200 steps away, there were 2 top experts, one King Kong and one Xianxia. Su Fengyan continued forward in a straight line, killing people without any fancy movements. He mostly used the burst and arc spear techniques of the 4-word formula that Spear Immortal King had comprehended. Especially the arc spear technique, it was wide open and was best suited for chaotic battles. Wherever the arc spear technique was used, the burst word formula energy would be mixed in. Within 20 feet of Su Fengyan, no one survived. However, Su Fengyan didn't feel proud at all. Instead, his heart became heavier and heavier. He headed straight for Dong Zhuo's flag. Everyone knew that the only people who could stop him were those martial path experts. Normal soldiers were useless. However, the Beimang infantry formations pushed forward without any hesitation. If they were unlucky enough to meet him, they would die. Chapter 1509. In history, The grassland cavalry's large-scale invasions to the south mostly bypassed the strategic passes and majestic cities and towns, where they surrounded the enemy without attacking, forcing the enemy to disarm and surrender. In the true sense of the word, the nomads on horseback were not good at siege battles, and the losses outweighed the gains. Instead of fighting to the death with the defending army at the border, it was better to go around the city and raid the hinterland where the city walls were low and the morale was low. Even though Su Fengnian had long understood that Northern Mang's plan was a bad one, that they had no choice but to make an example out of Northern Liang, Dong Zhuo and the Magistrate of Peace were clearly ambitious as well. They wanted to use Northern Liang's 300,000 border soldiers as whetstones. This was the same reasoning as when Su Fengnian used Tuoba Bodhisattva to build up momentum. If they could win, they would be able to gallop across a wide expanse of flat plains. Once Beiliang fell, Beimang, which seemed to have suffered heavy casualties, could win the most precious general situation. It was just like when the Su family's cavalry defeated West Shu and secured the victory at the Battle of West Leibi. After that, they attacked West Shu and South Tang. It was just the icing on the cake. The key point that made Su Fengnian feel heavy was that Beimang only had Dong Zhuo and Taiping Ling at the beginning. However, after the fierce battles at Hooded Town and Heluku, Beimang's soldiers began to quickly get rid of the discomfort of dismounting and fighting. Su Fengnian led the Phantom Cavalry to fight Beimang's cavalry outside Heluku. At that time, he did not see Zhong Tan leading his troops to attack the city, so he did not have a deep impression of it. Only when he was there and saw them advancing in an orderly manner and taking turns attacking the city did he realize that Beimang's million soldiers had a high chance of winning. Su Fengnian was suddenly enraged. Beiliang was a small place with few people. Every time Qingliang Mountain recruited a master, they had to use them carefully. Even Su Fengnian treated the Finger Xian Realm Sword Path Grandmaster Mi, Fengjia, with respect. But on this battlefield, a few Master Realm Masters had already died. Out of the 3 that showed up, there were 2 that blocked his path. He found some clues and casually tossed out an arrow to kill one of them. In the blink of an eye, there were 6. On the other hand, how many Master Realm Masters could there be in the entire Whispering Water Room? Just as Su Fengnian was about to kill the hidden masters, those Wu Dao masters suddenly retreated from the battlefield at the same time. Su Fengnian raised his head and looked. It turned out that Dong Zhuo's South Courtyard King flag had begun to move to the rear, luring the enemy in. Su Fengnian, who originally wanted to quickly charge forward, suddenly stopped. For the sake of preventing any accidents from happening on the battlefield, the Huayang Pass Protectorate's Luya and Fuling garrisons had made corresponding arrangements. If Northern Mang didn't hesitate to send several thousand cavalry to surround and kill him, the 2 garrisons had even prepared for the worst. Even Lu Jinu had clearly stated that the cavalry within the city could charge out at any time. Su Fengnian had his eyes on Hoda's city, so he was confident that he could charge in alone and leave the battlefield. However, at this moment, Su Fengnian suddenly had a bad feeling. Dong Zhuo's breakthrough point, or Beimang's breakthrough point, wasn't Hoda's city or Gore Mouth, but Beimang's Lu province that both sides had their eyes on at the start, but had tacitly given up on as the situation changed. At that time, he had suggested Chu Lushan and Yuan Zuozong to launch an astonishing strategy. They wanted to use the great snow dragon cavalry that had been biding their time, and a genuine heavy cavalry, as the main force to move their forces and swallow up Yang Yuanzhan's army. They would first invite the enemy into the jar and then catch the turtle in the jar. In that case, was it possible for Northern Mang to change their strategy before this and attempt to swallow up Lu province in one go? Before Su Fengnian arrived at Huayang Pass, he had already followed the plan and asked Chu Lushan to give Ko Jianghuai the title of Lu province general. He would lead 3,000 cavalry and 6,000 Liangzhou infantry to assist Lu province and work with the Longxiang army to guard the Lu province battlefield where Tuoba Bodhisattva had joined the battle. Su Fengnian stood where he was and looked towards the west, towards the distant Lu province. At this time, more than 20 cavalry had unknowingly followed the king of Beimang into the battlefield, each of them carrying a sword. The two at the front were the sword-crowned Wu Luding of the Wu family sword tomb, and the female sword attendant Suohua. Wu Luding rode up to Su Fengnian's side. This young swordsman said with a mischievous smile, "You don't dare to advance anymore?" Su Fengnian didn't say anything. The sword attendant, Suohua, who was used to closing her eyes to rest, frowned and said in a low voice, "Let's get down to business." Wu Luding immediately kept quiet out of fear and helplessly said, "Protector General Chu wanted me to pass on a message. He said that he felt that the boy Dong Zhuo has bad intentions. So he took the initiative last night to bring several hundred of his personal guards to Lu Province. However, at the border between Lianglu Province and Lu Province, he already had 8,000 soldiers lying in ambush there, waiting for Bei Meng to make this move." Oh, and Protector General Chu also said that those 8,000 soldiers were all troublemakers that had been urgently picked out from the various border armies. Without him personally leading the troops, those old soldiers wouldn't be able to do anything. Su Fengnian suddenly began to laugh heartily, unable to stop no matter what. Wu Luding turned his head at Suohua and asked, "Have you gone crazy?" Su Fengnian finally stopped laughing and looked towards Dong Zhuo's banner in the distance to the north. He smiled and asked, "Do you dare follow me to break the formation for another 2 li?" Wu Luding said without hesitation, "I'm just here to pass on the message." "I don't dare." The female sword attendant opened her eyes and calmly said to Su Fengnian, "Your Highness, please be at ease with your back." Su Fengnian nodded. Those 8,000 old soldiers that had been put together at the last moment. In reality, long before the Su family had died, they had already been disorganized. Even before that, when a certain fatty led his army into Shu, there was no such thing as a direct line of soldiers. It had always been Great General Su Xiao who gave him as many soldiers as he wanted to fight. The soldiers under his command were either the ones who died the quickest in the Su family army or the ones who rose the quickest. If one had to give him a name, there was one. It was a battle that had made him famous when he was young. It had taken place by a river. At the time, of the 8,000 cavalry that he had put together, only 400 had survived. After Su Fengnian's hereditary title as the king of Northern Liang, he had a casual conversation with Fatty, who was the governor of Northern Liang, a Huayang Pass. Only then did he know that ever since Fatty had led troops in more than 70 battles, there were about 10,000 people left in Northern Liang who had served under him and had not died. The older ones had already become the family heads of the general families. Most of them were young men in their 40s in the army. The most useless of them should be at least a standard commander at the very least. If Su Fengnian remembered correctly, that river was called the Yeluo, at the border bordering the cold stream. A fatty who had just put on his armor and mounted a horse looked at the cavalry in front of him, those familiar faces. He laughed and asked, "Everyone, how does it feel to go from a general to a lowly soldier under my Chu Lushan's command?" The cavalry roared with laughter. The fatty beamed and said, "I hear that there are quite a few people from the infantry who came here to make up the numbers. I, Chu Lushan, am a sentimental person and will not bicker with you all. Presumably, after all these years, you haven't fallen too far behind in archery and horses." The cavalry laughed even louder. The fatty's face suddenly seethed with killing intent as he viciously said, "Everyone here knows an old rule. If you follow me in a battle and don't die, you'll be promoted. This time, I'll have to disappoint all of you. It's hard to say if you'll die, but even if you don't die, you won't be promoted. Let me say this first. The enemy this time is the cavalry under the direct command of that Dong Zhuo of Bei Meng. There are at least 20,000 of them. We only have 8,000 people. What do we do?" A solemn silence reigned. Chu Lushan suddenly clasped his fist and said, "Then I invite everyone to make another trip to the Yeluo with Chu Lushan." Chapter 15:10. In the northern part of West Shu, there were 9 mountains that looked like swords. Among them, where the big and small swords faced each other, the old emperor of West Shu chiseled a rock to open the door. People called it the Sword Gate. This was because after Liang unified the Central Plains, the Swords Gate mountain road had been banished into the Cold Palace. For many years, Only those small merchants would travel through this road. As for the Sword Gate, after Jian Zhehuang's death battle with Wang Xianji in Martial Emperor City, some people said that the reason for its nickname was due to the fact that Jian Zhehuang had comprehended the art of swordsmanship while observing the mountains. There were even some who said that before Jian Zhehuang left Shu, he had carved a sword manual on a stone wall somewhere along the plank road. Now, there were quite a few young swordsmen from western Shu who came to the plank road in search of opportunities. It was the beginning of summer, when the peach blossoms gradually fell. The winding path between the mountain walls was slightly dark and damp. A middle-aged man was riding a donkey, and a handsome young man who looked like a page boy was leading the donkey. The young man was carrying a large bamboo box, and he was muttering to himself. The ordinary-looking man was probably used to the young man's complaints, so he turned a deaf ear to him and dozed off leisurely on the donkey. At this moment, a group of people came from a front. The leader was a common woodcutter in West Shu. He was leading a group of young men and women in embroidered clothes. The young man's eyes brightened. He threw a bunch of peach branches to the middle-aged man and whispered, "Master, master, hurry up, turn around and ride the donkey. Also, it's time for you to recite a poem. Otherwise, with so many donkey-riding followers in the world, you won't be able to show your identity. Otherwise, you can't call yourself the Peach Blossom Sword God. No one will believe you." The middle-aged man said helplessly, "I've met more than 10 groups of people along the way. Every time, I have to recite a poem with the word peach blossom. How can I have so many poems in my stomach?" The young man glared and threatened. "Then I'll repeat the previous one. That immortals in the forest, it sounds quite celestial. Master, if you don't recite it, I won't help you lead the donkey." The middle-aged man was indeed good-tempered and easy to talk to. He lazily turned around and rode the donkey. He held the peach branch in his hand and recited loudly, "Looking at the peach blossoms in the forest, the dusk deepens and the road grows longer. The old man taught me the 3 Pure Ones book, lived for 1,000 years and laughed at the sovereign king." The young man, who had been as tired as a dog, instantly assumed the demeanor of a child under an immortal. He looked straight ahead and led the donkey forward in large strides. When the group of young masters and young ladies who hired the woodcutter to lead the way saw this scene, they were stunned at first. Then, one of them turned to his companion and said, "Hey, these 2 little swindlers are bullying us because we haven't seen the world. Do they really think that they're dong-tai just because they got a donkey and a peach branch? I'll get a white horse and wear a saber. Then I'll be a Su Fengyan." The young man was so angry that his face turned red. The middle-aged man laughed and turned around again, no longer riding the donkey backwards. He threw the peach branch into the gap of the bamboo box. The 2 groups of people brushed past each other lightly. The young man with the donkey had carefully arranged this chance encounter, but in the end, he only received countless disdainful looks. The man looked at the dispirited youth's back and chuckled. "Angry? Don't be angry. Actually, Master has been wanting to tell you this for a long time. In Jianghu, it's all about a real person not revealing his true self." The young man snorted coldly. Obviously, he was still angry. The middle-aged man comforted him. "All right, Master will definitely bring you to see the great scenery of Shu this time." The young man was silent. The man could only smile. "Why don't Master ride the sword and let those people broaden their horizons?" The young man sighed. "Forget it. Those guys have eyes but can't see. Anyway, they're the ones who are at a disadvantage." The young man had his own worries. "Master, it's not that I want to criticize you. Among the 4 grandmasters in Jianghu, Chao Chongqing admires you. Later, you fought with Toba Bodhisattva so fiercely that even Su Fengyan's flying sword was given by you. But now, everyone is talking about how Chao Chongqing defeated that useless monk and how domineering Su Fengyan was when he fought with Toba Bodhisattva for thousands of miles in the western region. No one said anything good about you. I'm worried." The man joked. "Then why do you always practice swordsmanship when I teach you swordsmanship?" The young man sighed heavily like an old man. "I know my own limitations. I don't have the foundation nor the talent. I can't be a disciple, so I can only hope that Master will be more successful." The man laughed angrily. You're really open-minded. The young man suddenly turned his head and asked, Master, why did you take me in as your disciple back then? Look at Wang Xinji, Linya, and the others. They are all top-notch martial arts grandmasters. So let me tell you, don't expect me to help you make a name for yourself in Jianghu. The man said casually, Master, what do I need that for? Besides, it's great to live happily and die without regrets. Do you think that Chao Chongqing, Su Fengyin, and Tuoba Bodhisattva can do this? They can't do it. If Master were to die tomorrow, you would be able to rely on yourself and not have to worry about food and clothing. So I don't have too many people and things to worry about. Su Fengyin can't let go of his father's inheritance. Chao Chongqing can't let go of the Chu's empire, and Tuoba Bodhisattva can't let go of fame and fortune. Don't be envious of these land immortals who don't live happily. The young man sighed. It's really tiring. It was the real peach blossom sword deity, Dong Tai. He smiled and said, Do you feel as tired now that I've said that? The young man chuckled. It didn't seem like he was trying to find joy in his misery. He said sincerely, Master, you're right. There was a commotion behind the master and disciple. The young man turned his head to look. It was the young masters and young ladies who had turned back and stopped not far away. Then, they sent the woodcutter to run in front of them. He seemed a little embarrassed. He rubbed his hands and smiled at Deng Tea, who was on the donkey's back. Can we discuss something? Dong Tai smiled and said, Brother, what is it? The woodcutter lowered his voice and said, Brother, I'm sorry. Those rich kids said that they want to buy a donkey from you. I can't afford to offend them, so I have no choice but to run this errand. Brother, if you're willing to sell it, I think you can raise the price and ask for 20 or 30 taels. I think they won't care about the difference. Before Dong Tai could say anything, the young man was already furious. He didn't vent his anger on the woodcutter. Instead, he turned to the group of rich kids and shouted, Our donkey is not for sale. We won't sell it even if they give us 10,000 taels. Dong Tai, who had turned the donkey around, touched his chin and said softly, If it's gold, we'll sell it. The young man, who wanted to see the world in chaos, added, Count yourselves lucky. Master said that we'll sell it for 10,000 taels of gold. The woodcutter shook his head. These two people really didn't know the dangers of the world. They were in the wilderness. If that group of angry young people had bad intentions, would he have to report them to the authorities after he went down the mountain? Along the way, this group of men and women were all very arrogant. They kept talking about the governor of a certain county and a certain general. They didn't seem to be from an ordinary family. Just as the woodcutter was begging for peace, the 7 or 8 people had already walked over aggressively. One of them was a young man with a strong body and a sword hanging from his waist. He pointed at Dong Tai and sneered, Old man, don't be so shameless. This young master is magnanimous. I'll give you one last chance. This donkey, I'll buy it for 50 taels of silver. It's not that I can't pay a higher price. This young master once spent 4,000 taels of gold in a month. However, I've always had a principle in life. Even if I'm a sucker, I still have a bottom line. The young man suppressed the anger in his chest and said, Master, how can you tolerate this? In short, I don't want to tolerate this anymore. I want to make a move. I won't be able to deal with a grandmaster, but I'm more than enough to deal with these guys. Dong Tai glanced at a beautiful young woman in the group and then looked at his disciple. The latter swallowed his saliva guiltily. Chapter 15:11. At that time, Dong Tai had just left the Wu family sword tomb and was not yet the Peach Blossom sword god. He was a nobody in Jianghu and had no interest in showing off his swordsmanship to others. He tolerated as much as he could. In the early years, it was this foolish disciple who had been beaten up by others when he saw injustice on the road. Perhaps this was his innate chivalrous heart. It was something that Dong Tai did not have. To Dong Tai, everything in the world, except for the sword in his heart, had nothing to do with him. Later, one day, after listening to a storyteller's Jianghu romance in a restaurant and commenting on the sex and masters in Jianghu, his disciple suddenly said that he wanted to learn martial arts. Dong Tai laughed and asked him what would happen if he learned martial arts. He said that he had not thought about it, and would think about other things after he learned it. At that time, Dong Tai was happy to get rid of this burden, so he secretly helped him enter a small sect. When the child, who was thought to have a good foundation, became a direct disciple of the small sect, it did not take long for him to lose his drive to become master. Practicing martial arts was normal, but because he was a direct disciple, he could get 1 tael of silver every month, so he became a little money grubber. Dong Tai, who was worried about him, had no choice but to show up. The excited child saw Dong Tai at the gate and said that he wanted to treat him to a good meal. Then he ran back to the sect and took the bag of silver he had saved up. It turned out that the child had bought a saber for Dong Tai in the sect. Because the child had traveled with Dong Tai in the past, he had occasionally heard Dong Tai snort disdainfully at the swordsmen of the world. He thought that his savior, who could not afford a weapon, should not like being a swordsman, but rather a saber wielder. From then on, Dong Tai took in his one and only disciple. As for the saber, he exchanged it for a donkey. When Dong Tai went to martial emperor city of the Eastern Sea to fight with Xianxia, it was a time when peach blossoms were blooming. His disciple was very attentive, at least much more attentive than Dong Tai, who had gone empty-handed. He earnestly advised his master not to fight with someone empty-handed, as it would be too disadvantageous. In the end, he could not persuade his master, who was unwilling to use a sword. The child could only point angrily at a peach tree, saying that his master should at least use a peach branch as a sword. After that, there was a peach blossom sword deity who rode a donkey in the Jianghu. Ever since Dong Tai became famous, this disciple would still complain about his master not being able to win against Xianxia. He complained that Xianxia had an advantage in age and that it was an unfair victory. He complained that Dong Tai gave that box of 12 flying swords to Su Fengyan, but he did not complain about his master not thinking about his disciple first when he had something good. Instead, he complained that his master never showed that box of flying swords in front of him and treated him as an outsider. Because of this, he even had a cold war with Dong Tai for half a month. The youth also complained that the Jianghu did not have good eyesight. His master was clearly a grandmaster in the art of killing, but he had to stand shoulder to shoulder with the other 3. Amidst these trivial complaints, Dong Tai felt that his ears were about to grow calluses. Then, suddenly one day, he realized that this seemingly young disciple of his had really grown up. He began to steal glances at the beautiful women he met on the streets. It turned out that his lips were starting to grow stubble. Just as Dong Tai was in a daze, the tall and sturdy youth holding the sword angrily said, "My temper. Hey, old man, don't be so shameless. Luckily, I'm not an unscrupulous disciple who uses his power to bully others. Otherwise, you would have already been beaten to the ground. Hurry up, 50 taels of silver, and the donkey is mine. You and that brat can take the money and scram. It's enough for you 2 poor bastards to go to the best restaurant in the Shu lands to eat and drink." Dong Tai flipped off the donkey and patted the back of the donkey. He looked at his disciple, who was much less impulsive than when he was young. Back then, he knew that he couldn't win, but he still wanted to get beaten up. Now, he was Dong Tai's disciple. Even if he couldn't exchange blows with a level 1 master, he would have no problem withstanding 20 to 30 blows from a level 2 master. However, he was becoming more and more disinterested in small fights. Dong Tai did not pay attention to the disciple, who was actually not too bad. He walked in front of his disciple and rubbed his head. He smiled lazily and said, "Disciple, although you don't have much potential, I am very happy to have a disciple like you." The youth felt his hair stand on end and said, "Master, what's wrong with you? You can't be sick, right?" Dong Tai smiled and said, "I'm just happy." In the crowd, a young man who drank too much waved his fan. He didn't put the donkey-riding middle-aged uncle in his eyes at all. However, that little bastard's eyes were too evil. Just now, he actually dared to secretly look at the girl he liked. Did he think that he didn't notice? The only daughter of the Western Shu Izhou deputy general, was she someone that a donkey-riding young man could covet? He skillfully closed his fan and smiled at the youth. 50 taels of silver is not a small amount. If you want to go to the Jianghu, you could buy a good weapon. If you want to go to the imperial examinations, you can even buy a lot of books. Dong Tai heard these words that were like needles hidden in cotton floss and laughed it off. His disciple rolled his eyes and said to Dong Tai, "Master, let's go." "Ignore them." Dong Tai nodded and said, "Give me the bamboo box." The youth frowned and said, "Don't. Although I'm afraid of being tired, I'm more afraid of our donkey being tired." "Master, you're carrying it. In the end, it's still the donkey carrying it. It's not young anymore." Dong Tai glared at him and said, "Give it to me if I want you to." The youth reluctantly took off the bamboo box and handed it to Dong Tai. He couldn't help but mumble again. Large and small swords faced off against each other. Between the mountains, there was a strong wind. Occasionally, birds would fly past. Dong Tai rarely carried the box himself. He then smiled at his disciple and said, "You go down the mountain first." In the next moment, Dong Tai made a strange movement. He took out the peach branch from the bamboo box and threw it high up. Just when everyone was confused, someone with sharp eyes suddenly realized that after the peach branch was thrown, it actually stopped in the air. Just when a youth was at a loss, Dong Tai lightly pushed his shoulder and shouted, "Raise the sword with chi, mountain stepping technique." After the youth who was pushed out of the cliff by his master heard this, even though he was high up in the air, he still subconsciously made the sword stepping technique. The youth just happened to step on the peach branch. This scene was like an immortal riding a sword. After a brief moment of panic, the young man, who had never eaten pork but had at least seen pigs run, suddenly laughed heartily and shouted, "Let's go down the mountain." The youth rode the wind and went down the mountain. His laughter echoed in the cliffs for a long time. How many Jianghu youths in the world dreamed of roaming Jianghu with a sword? How many people could be like the youth who was leading the donkey, flying around Jianghu like an immortal riding the wind? Dong Tai rode the donkey again and joked with the stunned youths, 50 taels of silver is really not enough to buy this donkey." Finally, Dong Tai glanced at the young lady that his disciple liked and said with a smile, "Little girl, remember that youth. He nagged Wang Xianxia about the martial emperor's city, drank wine with Chao Chongqing at the same table, pointed at Guangling Crown Prince Zhao Yuang and cursed. Of course, the most important thing is that this guy gave me the nickname of Peach Blossom Sword God. Isn't he awesome?" The young lady was so shocked that she couldn't speak. The old donkey's hooves tapped on the ground leisurely and went further and further away. The Peach Blossom Sword God on the donkey's back suddenly felt regretful. Tuoba Bodhisattva had already fought 3 of the 4 grandmasters. He couldn't fight Chao Chongqing anymore. Then, Dong Tai didn't know if he would have a chance to fight with Su Ke in this lifetime. "Kid, don't die. If you die under the hooves of the Beimang barbarians, won't you feel ashamed?" Martial Emperor city status in Jianghu plummeted after old weirdo Wang died in Beiliang, especially after Yugrum and the others left the EC one after another. This holy land of Jianghu in the past went through a long period of unrest. There were many independent forces in the city, especially without the restraint of the prohibition of martial arts. The fights between the experts were so frequent that it was difficult to find a higher place to fight. The fights between the sects were even more numerous. It was said that some busybodies calculated that there were as many as 60 sects that rose and fell within half a year. Of course, many of the so-called sects were just small kittens and puppies. All this chaos only began to stabilize after the young man, surnamed Jiang, had been fighting for half a year on the city wall. As for the young man's identity, there were many speculations. Some said that Jiang Fuding was Wang Xianji's real disciple in closed-door training. Some said that he was a banished immortal like Qi Xianzhu who had great luck and was the ultimate counter to the king of Beiliang in this generation. Jiang Fuding, who was a loner in Martial Emperor City, didn't pay attention to the affairs of the world. He just fought for the city wall day after day. The handsome young man who used to challenge the king of Beiliang with a pawn entering cold on his waist had become as tanned as a fisherman's. Ever since Linya, the grandmaster of fist techniques, left Martial Emperor City, Jiang Fuding stopped drinking. In fact, it wasn't like a turtle dove occupying a magpie's nest. Wang Xianji's residence had become ownerless. Jiang Fuding used his fist to monopolize old weirdo Wang's former residence. Those who didn't accept it or didn't have eyes had their bodies smashed by him. That night, the bright moon shone over the sea. Chapter 15:12. Using the moonlight, Jiang Fuding sat cross-legged at the top of the city wall with a pot of wine, drinking slowly. This young man with a hidden identity had once been young and arrogant. In such a large Great Peace city, among his peers, he despised the two sons of General Gu Jiantang for being too rigid. He despised the fourth imperial son for his reputation, but lack of ambition. He despised the first imperial son Zhao Wu for being vulgar. He despised the children of the officials for being useless. In the end, he only got along well with the illegitimate son of the previous emperor, Zhao Kai. Before Zhao Kai returned to the capital from Xianxia Academy, and before he died at the Iron Gate Pass of the Western regions, the two got drunk. One said he would do great service for the Zhao Kai of Liang. The other said with a smile that the country was his and the Jianghu was his. In the future, if he helped Zhao Kai sit on the dragon throne, how about he, Jiang Fuding, be conferred the title of King of Freedom? Jiang Fuding gazed at the bright moonlight on the sea and was in a daze. In terms of status and family background, Zhao Kai was the son of the emperor and the disciple of Yang Taisui. He, Jiang Fuding, was not weak. He was the son of the imperial tutor of Liang. While he had completely concealed his identity and did not have the surname Yuan with that man in order to deal with the endless assassinations, which of the people at the top of Great Peace City dared to underestimate him. The youngest son of the former Minister of Revenue, Wang Xianxia, the current leader of the four young masters of Jing, had a conflict with him in his early years. In the end, he had come to kowtow and admit his wrongs that night. When he, Jiang Fuding, was young, he said he wanted to practice the blade. That man who spoke ambiguously asked for Gu Jiantang's blade manual for him. At the time, Gu Jiantang, who was still the Minister of War at the time, even taught him the Thunder Heart. That man even took out the soldier of crossing the river from the inner treasury. In those decades, no less than 20 martial grandmasters had taught him moves. Among them was Lu Hao of the Great Celestial Phenomenon realm of Great Celestial Phenomenon. Since this was the case, how could he, Jiang Fuding, lose to that Su? Jiang Fuding threw the wine pot into the sea and shouted, "How can I accept this? How can I admit defeat?" Jiang Fuding gasped for breath and took out a book from his bosom, as if he wanted to throw it away like the wine jug. However, he raised his arm and in the end did not throw it away. This book was his father's real legacy. The man whose real name was not known was once the well-deserved emperor's preceptor of Liang, the most intelligent strategist of the Liang dynasty. His opponents were Sun Ping, Huang Longshi, Su Xiao, Zhao Bing, the Prince of Yanqi, and the Spring of Eternal Hui, led by Zhang Jiulu. Jiang Fuding muttered, "Father, you have never lost, so how can I compare to you?" Jiang Fuding slowly retracted his hand as he looked at the yellowed book with a stupefied expression. The title of the book was written in meticulous script. It was a very strange name, Knight's Sailing Ship. Jiang Fuding knew the reason, because that man once mentioned that among all the knowledge in the world, Knight's sailing was the most difficult to deal with. At the beginning of the book, there was an absurd story about people from the three sects of Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism. The four of them were sailing on the sea together with an old boatman. The Confucians said that the study of saving the people was awe-inspiring and righteous. The Taoists said that the method of immortality was incomparably mysterious. The monks said that the profound Buddhism was like a fairy scattering flowers. The more the boatman listened, the more frightened he became. He was so scared that he almost threw away the bamboo wormwood in his hand. Later, the more he listened, the more sleepy he became. In the end, he accidentally threw away the bamboo wormwood, causing the four of them to be unable to return to the shore. This book was personally given to Jiang Fuding by Yuan Bunshi when he brought Song Kelly out of the capital to travel north and south of the Great Jiang. He only said that the stories in the book were merely hearsay stories from the countryside. They were like scribbles, hardly worthy of being refined. It was purely the work of an old teacher who was bored to death. Other than flipping a few pages for his son to read, There was no other use for it. There were more than 200,000 words in this book, so every page was densely packed. Jiang Fuding could totally imagine the scene without any grandeur. A slightly reclusive old man was on duty in the Hanlin Academy under the identity of Yuan Pu. He had a bottle of cheap and good wine, a plate of fragrant peanuts, and a purple brush that was as sharp as a knife. He sat alone and drank. His strokes were very slow, and his strokes were very small. Every time he wrote something he was satisfied with, he would take a sip of the wine. Jiang Fuding carefully put the book back in his arms and lay back. He looked at the bright moon above his head. When I was young, you told me that heaven and earth gave birth to me as a man. If I win, I'll be a hero. If I lose, I'll be a hero. If I die, I'll be a ghost. Jiang Fuding closed his eyes and said bitterly, "But when you saw me for the last time, you said that it was enough for me to live well." After a long silence, the most reclusive young man in the martial emperor city fell into a deep sleep. Bathed in the morning light, Jiang Fuding finally opened his eyes and sat up. He said softly, "I've made up my mind. The world can forget 100 or 1,000 Jiang Fuding, but they can't forget Yuan Bunshi." Jiang Fuding stood up again and murmured with tears in his eyes, "Father, I'll settle the score with Zhao Zhuan and Liang for you. I'll help Zhao Zhu sit on the dragon throne. I miss you very much. So, if you're lucky enough to survive, we'll meet in the imperial court." Right at this moment, a little boy carrying a small bamboo basket ran up the city wall. His clothes might be shabby, but he was rather neat and tidy. When he didn't speak, his clean little face had a solemn expression that other children of the same age didn't have. When the little boy saw that familiar slender figure, he steadied his breathing and recuperated before shouting, "Jiang Fuding." It was said that Wang Xinji's disciples, Yu Groom and Linya, loved to go to that little place for breakfast. A 7- or 8-year-old child's horizons were naturally higher. The child had a skinny dog and would walk the dog around the city when he had nothing to do. It was as though he was a general patrolling his territory. After Jiang Fuding arrived at the martial emperor's city, there was no one to help him take care of his life. Especially after Linya left the Eastern Sea, she was very particular about everything. Therefore, she would casually settle her breakfast at that bun shop. Every time, she would spend 20 copper coins to buy a small basket of thin and juicy buns. As time passed, she became familiar with the little boy who collected the money. She would occasionally tease this little boy who was very rigid in everything he did and said. Jiang Fuding was also puzzled. How did such an easygoing couple raise such a strange child who was filled with the aura of an old scholar? The child who followed this old man and Linya with the surname go past the basket of buns to Jiang Fuding and said seriously, 20 copper coins. Put down first. If you forget, I will remind you." Jiang Fuding said helplessly, "Go, don't care. It's only 20 copper coins. I won't forget you." The little boy stared and said, "My surname is Go, and my name is Yufang. I took it from the saint scriptures. When one's parents are around, one should not travel far. There must be a method to travel." Jiang Fuding, who had been quiet in the Eastern Sea for a long time, only showed some of the demeanor of the capital city's top-notch clan when he met this interesting child. He smiled and said, "You don't even know who your parents are. Why do you need to have a method? In my opinion, that green-clothed girl who grew up with you, the nickname she gave you is more suitable. Go, don't care. Go, don't care. It's easier to call you that." The child put on a stern face and said, "Don't say indecent things." Jiang Fuding laughed and said, "What does a little kid know about etiquette?" Back then, the scholar who told me about etiquette was Duke Yinsheng of the Zhang family. The child frowned. "I don't know if that teacher is learned or not, but I know that his students did not learn well." Jiang Fuding, who was being teased and lectured by a child, was not angry. He sat on the city wall and opened the slightly cool bamboo basket. He gently picked up a small and exquisite bun with 2 fingers and threw it into his mouth. His mouth was full of fragrance and endless aftertaste. In the past, in Great Peace City, he had eaten so many delicacies that were called the best in the world that he could not remember the taste. Now, it was these small meat buns that were only 2 copper coins each. If he did not eat a basket of them each day, he would not be able to forget them. Jiang Fuding smacked his lips and ate 6 or 7 buns in one go. Then he seemed to remember something of the past. He chuckled and said, "It rained heavily in Great Peace City. Many fish drowned." Go Yufeng sighed and said softly, "It's not funny." Jiang Fuding lowered his head and looked at the buns in the basket. He said emotionally, "That's right. People eat dirt once, and dirt eats people once." The child did not say anything. After all, he was so young and should not have such feelings. Jiang Fuding suddenly turned his head and looked at the child standing beside him. He smiled and said, "After second grade master, entering the Vajra realm depends on perseverance. Finger Xian depends on talent and comprehension. If you want to have the phenomenon of heaven and earth, you have to rely on your innate talent. As for becoming a land immortal, it depends on that illusory fate. Go Yufeng, do you want to practice martial arts?" The child shook his head without hesitation and said, "No." Jiang Fuding said in shock, "In this martial emperor city, you interact with people of the underworld every day. You don't want to practice martial arts?" The child said softly, "I heard that practicing martial arts is a bottomless pit. No amount of money can fill it. I have no money." Jiang Fuding suddenly looked at the last bun in the basket in a daze. He asked in surprise, "Go Yufeng, I remember that I have already eaten 10 buns. Why is there one more today?" The child said calmly, "Grandpa said that you people of the underworld need to train your body. Therefore, you need to eat more. I asked Grandpa for one more. I can only ask for one more. Otherwise, this basket of buns will be a loss. It is not easy for Grandpa to earn money." Jiang Fuding did not know whether to laugh or cry. Then he smiled gently. He seemed to be reluctant to eat the 11th bun immediately. Chapter 15:13. Jiang Fuding finally picked up the steamed bun and ate it slowly. He looked into the distance and laughed softly. "You might not want what I give you. Moreover, in the long run, I might not be good to you. However, I'll be leaving the city soon and most likely won't be coming back. But I'll miss you, little brat, and I hope you'll live well. I hope that when you grow up one day and I haven't been eaten by 2D, you'll come and find me. I'll treat you to a drink then." Hearing that Jiang Fuding was leaving the martial emperor city, the child was a little disappointed, but he didn't show it on his face. He only nodded and said, "Okay." Jiang Fuding smiled and lifted the bamboo basket with one hand. He looked at the vast sea with rising tides and laughed loudly. "Don't you see the 3 mountains and 5 peaks in the sky? Don't you see the endless sandstorms in the northwest killing people? Don't you see the great rivers flowing into the sea and never returning? Listen to me. One's life is only 100 years. If you want to seek immortality, you can only do it in a cup of wine." The child also laughed along with Jiang Fuding's heroic spirit. For the first time, he joked, "When we meet in the future, you must treat me to good wine." Jiang Fuding threw the bamboo basket into the sea and rubbed the child's head. "It's not a big deal." The child was stunned. He said anxiously, "Jiang Fuding, why did you throw the steamed bun basket away?" "I want to bring it back for Grandpa." Jiang Fuding was stunned and speechless. He was in the wrong. A long time later, in the Jianghu, where the grandmasters of the older generation passed away one after another, there would be a very interesting saying. Yu Dilong wasn't really invincible. It was because there were still some tricks in the world. The people south of the Guangling River in Liang found it hard to imagine that there were places where the frost hadn't completely stopped at the beginning of summer. This was the Tu Liao. There were black mountains and white rivers here. Perhaps the first snow of the Liang dynasty would fall here, and it would also be the last snow. The winter snowstorm here was known as the Great Smoke Bubble, blotting out the sky and the sun. During the cold winter of last year, 2 people were escorted by Xianxia from the north of Jingji into Liao and Liao. The reason why the #1 swordsman in the capital was naturally because Groom Yu is a martial arts master that many forces were secretly trying to rope in. After Groom Yu declined the emperor's invitation to stay, Emperor Zhao Zhuan asked Xianxia to escort him all the way to dispel the covetous thoughts of the other forces. As the first disciple of Wang Xianji, being on good terms with Groom Yu is almost equivalent to accepting the mantle of the martial emperor city. Lu Huang, Lu Bonk, Linya, and the other three, even if they couldn't be of use to themselves, they could at least establish a good relationship with these top masters who were of the same breath and branch. Therefore, Qi Jiajia passed a message to the emperor at the border, telling Groom Yu that no matter when he returned to Great Peace City, His Majesty would treat him as a friend. On the banks of a river called the Sonan River in Jianzhou of Liaodong, there was a small village along the river. There were about 100 families, and most of the young adults in the village were hunters. It was said that the ancestors of a certain family once caught 2 gerfalcons in their lifetime and sent them as tributes to the governor's office that Liang had set up in Liao at that time. The family's heirloom, a well-made hardbow, was an additional gift from the governor's office in addition to the reward. There were 2 distinguished guests staying in the village. At the end of last winter, a group of hunters encountered a black bear that didn't enter hibernation for some reason. It was their benefactor who chased away the giant bear. After that, the young adults in the village liked to learn from the young man, and the children in the village also liked to play with the girl who liked to wear green. When summer came, the girl in green, who could finally take off her heavy fur coat, was very happy. Moreover, she had frostbite that winter, but she didn't feel that it was difficult to bear. Xiaoyu, on the other hand, always felt guilty. In fact, she didn't like Liao at first, because when they first arrived here, it was the height of the snowstorm. The terrible weather of the big fireworks was like a show of strength to her and Xiaoyu. Until they stopped in this village, she was led by her new friends to fish in the frozen river or to sit on a wooden board and slide on the ice. Every day, she could have a snowball fight with more than 10 people of the same age, which made her feel new and happy. Therefore, when Xiaoyu said that he wanted to go to Liao Bay, she was not willing, and then Xiaoyu didn't urge her anymore. Over time, she and Xiaoyu began to look like natives of Liaodong. Xiaoyu carried a bow and arrows, went hunting with the adults in the village, and began to raise young eagles under the guidance of the old hunters. She no longer wondered why the windows here were papered outside, why every house had big and small jars of pickles, and why the adults would say that if the children didn't listen to them, they would be hung in the basket. Today, Xiaoyu was helping a family in the village cut a plant that was more than 5 feet tall, which the locals called Lamus chinensis, to build a house. Of course, it was not the grass that sheep ate. Its stem was hollow, similar to the bamboo in her hometown. She quietly squatted by the side, watching Xiaoyu cut the stem with a knife, thinking that he was quite handsome. She remembered that the day before Grandpa Gao left Wulin City, he had a private chat with her. He talked about a lot of people, but she couldn't remember most of them. Only when he talked about Xiaoyu did she pay special attention, so she remembered clearly. Grandpa Gao said that among the swordsmen in the world, some had the best luck, and some had the best innate talent, but Xiaoyu's talent for swordsmanship was the best. She squatted on the ground. Thinking of Grandpa Gao, she suddenly felt sad. She actually knew that his surname was Wang, but he was so tall. She liked to call him Grandpa Gao, and he was never unhappy. Then she thought of another person. Before that person died, he called out to her, Green Robe. Xiaoyu said that person was very amazing, and that Grandpa Gao admired him for most of his life. She suddenly asked, Xiaoyu, Grandpa Gao asked you to find that person, so you can accept him as a disciple on behalf of your master. But how do we find him? Yu Groom turned his head and smiled. We can always find him. She said, Oh, I'm going to play. Then she got up and ran away. Yu Groom smiled knowingly, just like this little girl's brother. He was always afraid that she would find the trip to Liaodong boring, but now it seemed that he worried too much. The only trouble was that this little girl had learned a lot of local sayings from the local children, such as, you're stupid, scram, and stay away. Just thinking about it made Yu Groom break out in a cold sweat. As for the little brother, who was still in some unknown corner, in a sense, he was equivalent to his master's closed-door disciple. Yu Groom was not in a hurry at the moment. He firmly believed that they would naturally meet when the time came. This was a strange intuition. Yu Groom waited patiently. In the 500 years of Jianghu, there was only one Wang Xinji and one Li Chungang. In the evening, Yu Groom helped the villagers with their work. When he returned to the house, The owner of the house had already prepared dinner. Yu Groom did not know where the little girl was playing, so he could only imitate the villagers and shout. Soon, a response came from the riverside. She quickly ran back, lifted her skirt, and lightly stepped over the threshold. She saw Xiao Yu and the family already sitting on the brick bed. Because they waited for her, they did not eat. She made a face at Xiao Yu and then sat next to him apologetically. Yu Groom helplessly reminded her in a low voice. How can the host wait for the guest to eat? The middle-aged village woman liked the girl in green from the bottom of her heart. She quickly smiled and said, It doesn't matter. The middle-aged man, who looked like a southerner, poured a glass of wine for Yu Groom. The man was actually a foreigner, and his wife was a local. His ancestral home was in Dongyue. Back then, he followed his grandfather and father to Jianzhou. However, he went north earlier than Hongjia. It was a blessing in disguise. He was lucky to escape the spring and autumn war that burned the Central Plains. Because Liaoxi was the place where Liang rose, Liaodong also benefited a lot. Although it was not as good as Liaoxi, it was still worlds apart from the people of Dongyue who had heavy taxes. Moreover, everyone knew that there was a king with a different surname who came out of the forest in Jianzhou. In addition, the king of Liang who was in charge of the two Liaoxi was Zhao Sui, the king of Jiaodong. Zhao Sui was also very kind to the people in his jurisdiction. Although Beimang and Liang were in confrontation for many years, the flames of war had never spread here. Therefore, even a middle-aged man had never seen war since childhood. When the man's family was convicted and moved north, they brought a large box of books with them. Even if it was passed down to only one child in 4 generations, each generation of parents taught their children to read and write. They were able to do something that many nobles in the Central Plains could not do. The reason why Yu Groom chose to live in this house was that he felt close to the middle-aged man's scholarly aura, which was extremely rare in the north. When he heard that Yu Groom was leaving the village for Jianzhou the next day, the man inevitably felt a little regretful that he did not have a drinking buddy. Probably after drinking half a bowl of wine, the middle-aged man, who could not hold his liquor but was good at drinking, did not have too many taboos. He smiled and asked in a low voice, Brother Yu, are you going to see the ancestral home of the king of Beiliang? To tell you the truth, there's nothing to see. First, ordinary people can't get close because the guards of the king's mansion are watching. Second, many people say that there are only 2 or 3 shabby houses. It's said that many people who went to Jianzhou to join in the fun went in high spirits, but returned in disappointment. Yu Groom asked, Many people go to Jianzhou? The man gulped down the remaining half bowl of wine and said with a smile, That's right. There are many stories about this. We're only about 80 miles away from Jianzhou. When the village finds something valuable, such as mink fur and fox fur, especially the old ginseng that the Shangguan family forbade to privately dig up, they'll be handed over to me, a bookkeeper who can only read a few words, to secretly sell it in Jianzhou. That's why I'm not unfamiliar with Jianzhou. Although the woman had a very good impression of the groom and the little girl, when her husband talked about selling ginseng privately, she still secretly kicked him. Chapter 15:14. The man could not openly criticize his wife, so he pretended that nothing had happened. He continued, As for the famous butcher, even though he left Jianzhou for more than 20 years and died in Beiliang, people in Jianzhou still talk about him with relish. The first decade was the most lively. It was said that many powerful families in the Central Plains who had a reconcilable enmity with Butcher did not dare to go to Beiliang for revenge, so they thought about digging up the ancestral grave of the Su family. If our king of Jiaodong had not been on good terms with Butcher, I'm afraid he would have been killed. In my opinion, our king of Jiaodong was also implicated by Butcher. Otherwise, with his ability, he would not be in such a bleak situation now. Last time, you said that Zhao Ying, the Duke of Huainan, also died heroically in battle. Our king is not comparable to Butcher and the king of Yin, but compared to the Duke of Huainan and the new king of Jingyin, he is more than enough, right? Otherwise, he would not be able to sit on the position of the king of Jiaodong. Besides Beiliang, only the vassal territories here face to face with the barbarians of Beimang, right? If the late emperor did not trust our king's ability, he would not dare to make such an arrangement. Yu Groom nodded. The late Emperor of Liang had painstakingly placed Zhao Ying in Huainan Dao, which was right under his nose. He banished the ambitious Zhao Bing to Nanjiang. He let his brother Zhao Yi, who had the same father and mother, govern the richest Guangling Dao. The king of Jing, and who was the most unruly, was placed in Shangfan, Qingzhou, which was surrounded by enemies. Only Su Xiao and Zhao Sui were placed in the two places of Beijiang. The middle-aged man, who was neither a scholar nor a scholar, had unwittingly drunk 2 bowls of wine. Originally, he could only hold this much alcohol, but perhaps it was because 1,000 cups were not enough for a bosom friend. He poured himself another bowl. His wife could not stop him. He raised the bowl and smelled it, but did not drink. He raised his head and looked at Yu Groom opposite him. His eyes were a little unfocused. This middle-aged man, who was far away from the smoke of war and the court, seemed to be talking to himself. The Dongyue where my ancestors were in was destroyed by General Gu Jiantang. Perhaps it was not the work of Ren Tuesday. My grandfather had never had any ill feelings towards Ren Tu, and I am no exception. I heard that Tai and City was the place where people scolded Ren Tu the most in the world. Then it was Guangling Dao, which was known as the talented scholar, followed by Jiangnan, where there were countless distinguished scholars. Now, even the new king of Liang is being scolded together. It seems that the more they scold, the more powerful they get. One of them is the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights. I heard that he is from Beiliang. Hey, so, I really want to understand one thing. Since those people have all become officials of the Liang Imperial Court, many of them have not even seen Ren Tu and the new king of Liang. Even the rise of their families can be attributed to Ren Tu's victory. Younger brother, you have seen a lot. Looking at your temperament, I think you are also a well-read person. Can you help me clear up my doubts? Groom, you hesitated and smiled. Pick up the bowl to eat, put down the chopsticks to curse. The middle-aged man sighed. Yes, a country without a hero is like a house without a pillar, a person without a backbone. The man drank a big mouthful of the 3rd bowl of wine and was really drunk. He fell asleep under the care of his wife. He muttered to himself that if the new Liang prince couldn't defend the Northwest, he would also curse, including the young king's father. The middle-aged man's wife didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She nagged, "Do you really think you are high official? I don't see you working so hard on the crops all these years." Although the woman was nagging, she lowered her head to look at her man's face, which was much rougher than when he was young. Her slightly tanned face couldn't help but reveal a smile. She thought to herself, "Who asked you to be so handsome? Back then, I had a fight with many women to get you. Even if your farming is sloppy, it doesn't matter." After hearing that, Groomyu suddenly drank a bowl of wine and said indifferently, "A country without a hero, how sad. A country that has heroes but doesn't know how to respect them. How sad is that?" Groomyu got off the Kong and brought a small stool with the little girl to sit outside the room. He turned his head to look at her, who was in a daze, and said with a smile, "How about we go somewhere else to find your grandpa Gao's disciple?" The little girl turned her head and rolled her eyes. "If you want to go to Beiliang, just say it. I don't really care." Groomyu was a little embarrassed. He was about to say something when the little girl said seriously, Go. I miss Uncle Lu anyway." This Uncle Lu, when he was still in Wu City, he didn't know how to take care of himself. "I don't feel at ease with him away." Groomyu rubbed her little head and smiled, Yes. Uncle Lu, Uncle Gong, and your Aunt Lin, they can't do without you." She hurriedly shushed him. "You have to call her Sister Lin. If you call her Aunt Lin, she'll get angry." Groomyu laughed. "No wonder Master said you're not afraid of anything except the forest crows." The little girl suddenly sighed and said earnestly to Groomyu, "Xiaoyu, let's make a deal first. When we reach Beiliang, let's not fight and talk nicely, okay?" Groomyu pretended to be surprised. Who said we shouldn't quarrel if we can use our fists?" The little girl raised her chin and said fiercely, "I haven't said the second half of my sentence. When it's time to quarrel, we should discuss things properly. Those who use their fists aren't heroes." Groomyu narrowed his eyes and said softly, "If you travel to Jianghu in the future, You'll definitely become a heavenly heroine." The little girl nodded vigorously and then put her head on Groom Yu's knee. She said in a muffled voice, "Xiao, I wanted to go to Bailiang for a long time. I want to visit the place where Grandpa Gao passed away." Groom Yu nodded lightly and didn't say anything. The little girl raised her head slightly. There were still traces of tears, but there was a smile on her face. Xiao Yu, Bailiang is in the northwest. Then won't we be eating the northwest wind every day? Groom Yu smiled. Yes, there are battlefields everywhere. We might have to eat a lot of sand. It was not easy to be an official in the capital. Even though Fan Zhonghe, who had been bestowed the title of the #1 national chess player of the dynasty by the emperor, had become a new noble in the Hanlin Academy, he couldn't help but sigh. The Fan family could be said to be a scholarly family. However, in Xianxia, it was not considered a luxurious family. When he was summoned to the capital, he went north alone. He didn't bring any servants or servants with him. He had about 700 to 800 taels of silver on him. He thought that even if he couldn't be extravagant in the capital, he wouldn't be too shabby. He didn't think that when he actually became an official in the capital, he would realize how expensive it was. After all, Fan Zhonghe had never received the special honor of being conferred by the emperor, and he wasn't a true scholar in the imperial examinations. He didn't have a master room in Tian City to rely on, and he didn't have the financial support of his fellow countrymen. However, for officials in the capital, especially Huang Minlang of the Hanlin Academy, their residences had to match the prestige of the official system. Thus, Fan Zhonghe gritted his teeth and rented the old residence of an old assistant minister of the Ministry of Works. It could barely be considered a place with a pavilion, a garden, and lush greenery. However, this cost him 200 taels of silver. That was the price the old assistant minister gave him for the sake of Huang Minlang. If it were any other official, not to mention 200 taels of silver, even 400 taels of silver wouldn't be enough. The Liang imperial court did not take care of everything in the matter of official uniforms. Other than a few sets of official uniforms that were set by the Ministry of Rights, the rest had to be provided by the officials themselves. The purchase of a wide variety of official uniforms was another large expense. Fan Zhonghe had only learned, after working for a period of time in the Hanlin Academy, that many old-fashioned old Hanlin scholars who did not know how to make money were so poor that they had to borrow official uniforms all year round. To make matters worse, Fan Zhonghe, as a newly popular person in the great and city officialdom, had to attend a variety of banquets and weddings and funerals of his colleagues. This caused this young man to spend money like water. Adding on the dignity of the Hanlin Academy, the ink and paper that he needed for his daily study, he had all kinds of connections. Fortunately, when Fan Zhonghe went to the capital, he had brought with him about 20 unique and rare books that had been engraved. Many of his colleagues in the Hanlin Academy loved books to the point that they would borrow money to buy books, even if they were poor. After receiving this gift, Fan Zhonghe started to gain a foothold in the Hanlin Academy. He also promised many of the officials in the capital that he would buy the locally engraved and large books in his hometown that were relatively cheap. This gave Fan Zhonghe a good impression. In reality, the purchase was just an excuse. He was giving away his treasures from the library at home. He believed that those old foxes who had cultivated for half their lives in the government knew this, but neither side said it out loud. Most of the officials from outside the capital lived in the southeast area of the city. The scenery here was not bad. Scholars from the south like Fan Zhonghe all had to enter the capital through this area. Therefore, those prominent officials from Liang, even though they had been given positions in the court of the inner city, still had their own residences here. It was convenient for them to guide their descendants. Most of the recitation gatherings in Great and City were held here. From spring to summer, it was close to the Mang seed. There was an old saying that spring fought for the sun and summer fought for the time. In the past, it was always the Mang seed time. Large numbers of scholars and refined scholars would hold gatherings near the Shinran Pavilion. What was interesting was that some family was so large that they had specially set up 20 or so mu of rice fields that were not easily seen in the north for people to enjoy. In the summer, every night, there would be frogs croaking. This year's Shinran Pavilion gathering was especially interesting. It was unknown if those old officials had a tacit understanding. From Secretary of the Secretariat Qianglong to Tananan of Minxiao Province, to Zhao Yuling and Yi Maochun, who had risen in the eternal Hui Spring, none of them participated this year. But from Chun Wang, Yin Jieshi, Jin Lanting, Li Jifu, Gao Tingshu, Sun Yin, and the others, these young people with the greatest reputation in Great City, almost none of them were absent. They all attended this Shinran Pavilion gathering. Fan Zhongho, who had risen in fame, was also present. This gathering of people did not strictly have an initiator. They just called their friends and brought them along. The Shinran Pavilion became unprecedentedly lively. Chapter 15:15. At that time, Fan Zhongho and the youth from the Imperial Astronomer had a discussion in front of the Emperor and Empress. In the end, 6 people stayed until the end. Among them, Chun Wang and the Zhuangyuan Li Jifu had a good chat. The imperial brother-in-law, Yin Qiji, chatted with Song Kelly, and he, Fan Zhongho, got along well with the crazy Sun Yin on chess. Interestingly, his experience in the bureaucracy of the capital followed this trend. Li Jifu was often an honored guest of the Chun Manor. In the Hanlin Academy, Yin Qiji and the young phoenix of the Song family studied history together. It was said that they got along very well. Although Fan Zhongho and Sun Yin were not close friends, they would occasionally talk about the state of the world. Today, Fan Zhongho met with Sun Yin and then went to the Shinran Pavilion together. In Great Peace City, many officials would laugh and say, high officials ride thin horses and don't show off their wealth. But Sun Yin, who had been banished, was different. He openly bought a tall horse from Bailiang and rode this horse to and fro every court meeting and when he was on duty. It was very eye-catching. Today, Fan Zhongho had the good fortune to ride a horse with the wind. He rode the same horse with Sun Yin. When they arrived near the Shinran Pavilion, where there were many carriages and tourists, Fan Zhongho flipped off the horse and couldn't help but rub his butt. Sun Yin, this guy really rode in Great Peace City. Fan Zhongho was going to suffer. When Sun Yin saw Fan Zhongho's sorry state, he gloated. They arrived at the Shinran Pavilion one after the other in an inconspicuous carriage. 2 men wearing simple but elegant green robes stepped out. Sun Yin saw that they were Chun Wang, the assistant of the left scattered cavalry, and Li Jifu, the Zhuangyuan scholar. He originally thought that, according to Sun Yin's noble nature, he would at most give them a sidelong glance and then ignore them. Unexpectedly, Sun Yin actually took the initiative to pull him forward. Li Jifu, who also saw the 2 of them, obviously did not expect Sun Yin to greet them. He could not conceal the incredulity in his eyes. On the other hand, Chun Xiaobao, who was the most successful official in the entire Liang dynasty, whose official career was comparable to that of Jin Saburo, did not show the slightest bit of surprise. He warmly smiled at them and said, "Brother Sun, Mr. Yuetian, let me make it clear in advance that I still won't drink today. I can only use tea as a substitute for wine." Sun Yin coldly snorted and said, "So what if you drink tea? I'll drink wine. Let's each have a cup. I can still make the assistant go to the toilet 4, 5, 6, or 7 times." Chen Wang bitterly smiled and cupped his fist to beg for mercy. "Brother Sun, please don't bully a fellow countryman. I implore Brother Sun to point the spearhead at Ji Fu. Otherwise, Mr. Yuetian is also fine." Fan Zhongho smiled and said, "Assistant Minister, you can't just rely on your high official status to divert trouble to someone else. It will damage the reputation of the court." Li Jifu looked at the 3 people who were talking without restraint and felt a little envious. Although he had many private gatherings with the assistant minister, who was both a relative of the emperor and an important official of the court, he had never really let loose. Every time he returned home from a gathering, he would even think carefully about whether there was something wrong with his words, or if there was something wrong with his words, or if he had been rude. It was no wonder that Li Jifu was worried about personal gains and losses. Everyone knew that Chun Xiaobao, who was the #1 official of the emperor, would soon have a place in the small court meeting. Moreover, compared to other officials in the capital, Li Jifu knew more reliable insider information. The secretariat of the Liang Imperial Court had been empty for decades. After Qianglong took over, It could be said that there were many things waiting to be done. Chen Wang, who was the assistant minister of the left scattered cavalry in Minxiao province, although he was already a third-rank official, it was very likely that he would be transferred to the Secretariat of the Secretariat within a year or two and take up the position of Assistant Minister of the Secretariat that no one had yet confirmed. There were many assistant ministers in the 3 provinces and 6 ministries, but the Assistant Minister of the Secretariat was undoubtedly the most important one. It was not that the Hanlin Academy did not have a good title, but it was the trend. However, these rules did not affect Chen Xiaobao. A 30-year-old assistant minister of the Secretariat might not be considered shocking in the old Liang dynasty, but Li Jifu dared to say that this was a feat that would never be repeated in the future. Zhao Yuling, Yin Mao Chun, Jean Lanting, all of them had their eyes fixed on the title of Grand Secretary. However, only Chen Wang was so absent-minded and leisurely strolling. Perhaps many people present at the time did not expect that this gathering at the Xinran Pavilion in the second year of the auspicious era would leave behind many popular and elegant stories in the history of the future. Dong Yuran, who was personally praised by Tannan as the son of the Dong family as ghosts and gods, whose writing is like a spring breeze, wrote the famous poem Xinran Pavilion. Huang Quan, the young artist who had helped Tannan make an exception for Qi Yanglong, was personally spread out on rice paper by the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rites, Jean Lanting. After getting drunk, he splashed ink and painted a painting that was hung in the imperial study that day, Drunken 8 Immortals. As for the poem that spread throughout the capital almost overnight, it was started by Sun Yin, followed by Jean Lanting, Yin Shiji, Song Kelly, Chen Wang, Fan Zhongho, and Gao Tingshu, a total of 64 people. Together, they wrote this world-shaking long poem. Of course, on this day, how could the Xinran Pavilion only be filled with handsome heroes and not beautiful women? The 3 most popular courtesans in the capital, each with their own merits, went up the stage one after another. They either danced or sang, especially the woman who had once been on the Rouge list, Li Baishe, who was known as the best in both voice and appearance. Her solo dance could be said to have shocked everyone. What was even more surprising was that after that day, there was no news of Li Baishe in Great Peace City. She disappeared so decisively, as if she had never been in this world. Afterwards, based on the words she said at the banquet, people guessed that she had fallen in love with an unknown swordsman and wanderer. From then on, they went off to roam the Jianghu together. There was no wind and rain, and the wind naturally dissipated. The people at the banquet didn't leave until late at night. Li Jifu was already drunk to the point of unconsciousness. Chen Wang, the highest-ranking official and the only one who did not drink, wanted to personally take Li Jifu away, but was urged to stay. He really couldn't leave and could only ask someone to take Li Jifu back. That person was the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rites, Jean Lanting. He personally helped Li Jifu back to the carriage with Gao Tingshu. Sun Yin also left late. He came with 2 people, but left alone, as if there was no one around. He rode his horse wildly, smelling of alcohol, and shocked many of the graceful ladies of the large families in the capital. Under the crowd's instigation, Fan Zhongho and Wu Xianxia had another battle of who's first and who's last. Both sides played their best moves one after another. Although Wu Xianxia lost the game, he didn't lose his momentum, which made the spectators exclaim in satisfaction. After this game, Wu Xianxia vaguely established Fan Zhongho's second place in Liang's Go. Yin Shiji, Song Kelly, and that fellow villager nicknamed Kong Wu Chi left together. Xinran Pavilion, Drunken 8 Immortals, and Heroes Travel to the Capital were all given to this young relative of the emperor. He would immediately send them to the imperial palace. Deep in the night, the lights were still bright. There were only a dozen people left in Xinran Pavilion. Everyone in the capital knew that Chen Wang, who usually did not touch alcohol, was the last to leave. Fan Zhongho and Wu Xianxia had already finished their game of Go. The latter and a group of friends left in high spirits. The people still in the pavilion were all new nobles in the Great Peace City. They were also willing to put down their faces to get close to Chen Wang, a high official in the central government. However, they were all scholars. Even if they drank too much, their chatter and actions did not diminish their scholarly habits. And Chen Wang was never the kind of person who liked to put on airs, so he got along well with them. In the end, it was unknown who was still unsatisfied, so they spent some money to call over a musician who had earned money in this gathering. The woman held a pipa in her arms and did not wear any makeup. Although she was not a national beauty, under the flickering lights, there was a hint of lovely and moving feeling. She was very timid. It was clear that business at the banquet today was slow, and she did not attract any business. She was not like the other women of the same trade. While they were tired, they had already returned full of money. This woman sat on a small stool prepared outside the pavilion. Before she played the pipa, she quickly glanced at the people sitting on the prayer mats in front of the pavilion. There were more than a dozen people, most of them sitting on the prayer mats on the steps. The steps had different heights. At the highest point sat two young men side by side. She could guess that since these people were able to appear in Shinran Pavilion and not far from the pavilion like most of the scholars, then they should be the most important people at the banquet today. They were the true important people of Great Peace City. Even if they were not today, they would be in the future. She was lost in thought for a moment. She was very curious what it would be like if these young masters who were waiting for her pipa played put on their official robes. The young master who had hired her to sing was sitting at the bottom of the steps. He smiled and reminded her in a gentle voice, "Miss, it is time to start." Her pretty face blushed, and she appeared slightly nervous. She said softly, "Young master, please wait a moment. Allow this servant to test the sound." Hearing the woman gently twist the strings of the pipa, Fan Zhongho, who had intentionally or unintentionally sat next to Chen Xiaobao, said with a slight smile, "This is the typical technique of the Wu family of Jiangzhou in our Xianxia. The lower part is the strength of the upper part. The tone is not high, the rhythm is not rushed, and it is slow. It is not as full as the big bows of the north, but it has its own unique charm. Due to this, the song is also a small tune with the charm of Jiangnan. After drinking too much, it is very comfortable to listen to this song." Chen Wang smiled and nodded. He said softly, "I only learned about the pipa when I came to Jing. In my hometown, there's a saying about the drum on horseback. In the past, I was just a poor scholar and did not go to the board of study. I am ashamed to say that even if I wanted to pretend to be cultured, I would only be a laughingstock. Therefore, in these years, I have sensibly not attended banquets and gatherings. Other people say that I'm not good at raising Wang. That is really flattering me." The name of the song, Daughter's Red, refers to the Jiangnan water, Jiangnan wine, and Jiangnan women. Then he heard the woman's clear and melodious voice reciting the first part of the song. Fan Zhongho was surprised. He smiled and said, "What a coincidence. It refers to the daughter's red wine. My hometown has this custom since ancient times. When a daughter is born, they will bury a jar of wine. When the wine is drunk, is the day the woman gets married. In addition, there's also the Zhuangyuan red, which is taken out for banquets when the man in the family obtains scholarly honors." Chapter 15:16. Then Fan Zhongho suddenly discovered that Chen Wang seemed to be in a trance. One part of the millet fragrance lingers around the beam, 2 parts of the flowing water, the cool weather, 3 parts of the fragrance of apricot flowers. A spring thunder buries a jar. After 18 years, the daughter is red, the daughter smiles, the daughter is delicate, the new wine becomes old wine. The little girl is waiting to wear the red dress. Fan Zhongho closed his eyes and listened to the sound of the pipa and the woman singing. He finally sighed softly. The ending of this song was not as beautiful as the name of the wine. The woman in the song had waited for many years, but still did not meet the young master who was far away. She also did not wear the red dress for another man, and died just like that. According to custom, if the woman in the family died before she was married, then the jar of daughter's red wine would be called huadiao and would be taken out and drunk. At the end of the song, it was said that the young master had finally returned home. Although he was the top scholar, he could only drink the jar of wine alone at the grave. After Fan Zhongho opened his eyes, He could not see anything strange from Chen Wang's face. The song ended, and the people gradually dispersed. There was no need for Fan Zhongho to ask. Someone had taken the initiative to lend him a fine horse. When Fan Zhongho mounted the horse, he inadvertently turned his head and saw Chen Wang standing outside the pavilion. He seemed to have said something to the little girl singing, and then walked towards the carriage. Fan Zhongho didn't have the slightest intention of probing further. With Chen Wang's well-known conduct and Fan Zhongho's understanding of this Chen Xiaobao, he definitely didn't think that this left scattered cavalry regular attendant would have the slightest intention of taking advantage of him. Fan Zhongho slowly rode his horse. Back then, he was far away in the Jianghu, and now he was high up in the imperial court. Benevolent teacher, even that son, Yin wants to be an official. Although I, Fan Zhongho, cannot play your game of spring and autumn, but I will do my best to play my own game of chess well. In the distance, Chen Wang boarded the carriage. Before boarding, he asked the woman holding the peep a question. He asked her if the young master in the song was better off not returning at all if he returned late. The woman was timid and did not know how to answer. Chen Wang did not mean it, so he bid farewell and left. Chen Wang slumped against the wall of the carriage. Even when he married that noble surnamed Zhao back then, even when his father-in-law was a duke of a county, Chen Wang did not drink at the wedding banquet. For this reason, many of the noble sons of the Zhao clan who attended the wedding had mocked and ridiculed him. However, after so many years, he, Chen Wang, had swept through the various departments of the capital, leaping through the Dragon Gate time and time again. Not to mention those unaccomplished noble sons. Even those powerful dukes and county kings only dared to sit on equal footing with him. Today, Chen Wang actually brought back a small bottle of wine. Just yesterday, he had received a secret intelligence report verbally. There were only 4 words in the message: dead. He felt guilty. Beiliang was the one who felt guilty. Already dead. She was just like the pitiful woman in the song who waited from Nu or Hong to Huadiao, but did not see anyone. In the south of Jiangnan, it rained every family during the Huang May season. In the north of the northwest, the reeds were fluttering. Chen Wang drank the wine one mouthful after another. Silently, he drank without stopping, and his tears flowed without stopping. At the time, Chen Wang's first thought was to vent his anger on that young vassal king, to vent his anger on the entire Beiliang, where he had long had nothing to worry about. Everything he had done these years, apart from the silverback then and the kindness of recognizing his worth, was more because she was in Beiliang. He hoped for Beiliang's stability. In the end, he only hoped for her to be stable. For this reason, he was not afraid of accompanying a monarch was like accompanying a tiger, not afraid of the treacherous clouds of officialdom. This extremely patient man was only afraid that he would talk in his sleep and call out that name. However, in the end, he, who could rely on his own words to change the world's copyright, who could persuade the emperor to increase his efforts to restrict the transport of grain, did nothing. On the official road, under the curtain of night, in the carriage, there was a man who might become the second Grand Secretary Zhang of Liang. He was like a child, wailing loudly. If one were to say that the first year of Xiangfu was a year that left the Liang Orthodox faction shocked, but they still had a card up their sleeve, then the second year of Xiangfu was a year where wind and rain covered the sky, making people gradually feel uneasy. In the late spring of this year, under Chao Chongqing's personal leadership, the West Shu rebels' arrogance reached the heavens. King of Jing and Zhao Sun's Qingzhou navy couldn't rescue them in time. The vassal king, Zhao Yi's Guangling navy was completely wiped out. This also directly led to the balance of power that Song Li had won with great difficulty in Guangling province being easily broken on the surface of the Guangling River. What was even more worrying was that the most important reinforcements of the southern border's elite army, after the Qingzhou navy, whose battle strength was inferior to Guangling's, had no choice but to avoid them. They could only disembark from a few narrow crossings in the upper reaches of the Guangling River. At the same time, the vassal king Zhao Yi, who had lost all of his naval forces, was defeated like a landslide. Following Xia, Shi personally taking charge of the Eastern Front, coordinating with the West Chu Navy down the river, The remnants of Zhao Yi's army could only turtle up in a corner. The territory they seized back from Song Li's hands seemed to have been handed over with both hands. The battle on the river affected the entire body. The Southern Expedition commander, Lu Xianxia's army had no choice but to stop and defend a few key points in place to prevent West Wuxia Xixi from leading his troops up north to take advantage of the situation to counterattack. This naturally caused the Liang imperial court's original plan of a pincer attack from the north and south to the east and west to surround West Chu's capital to the point that not even a drop of water could trickle through to become a dream. Fortunately, during this time of turmoil, there was still a gathering at the Shinran Pavilion in the capital. This meant that the people's hearts were still stable. Furthermore, Chen Jibao received the imperial edict and personally led 10,000 elite troops out of Shu. Furthermore, on the two Liaodong fronts and the northern border of Ji province, the great pillar state Gu Jiantang and the new general of Ji province, Yuan Tingshan, had won a series of beautiful battles. At noon, on the surface of the Guangling River, several large turreted ships that had recently been changed to flying the flag with the character Jiang on it went against the current. They did not stop at the river outside West Chu's capital, but instead continued to sail up the river. These warships were all seized from Guangling Prince Zhao Yi during the battle on the river. It was funny to say that these few turreted ships, which were supposed to display great power during the battle, were almost undamaged before the change of owners. On one of the towering turreted ships in the middle, there was a group of people leaning against the railing. There was a man with white hair on his temples, wearing a green robe that was the most elegant under the heavens. There was a young woman carrying a purple sword box on her back that was peerless in her generation. There were also military generals clad in armor. Each of them was high-spirited and vigorous, with a strict bearing. There was also a group of civil officials who had temporarily boarded the ship from the capital to enjoy the scenery, chatting and laughing. Among them, there were two young men who were the most eye-catching. If their identities were not taken into consideration, one of them had an ordinary appearance and a reserved bearing. He was only eye-catching because of the position he was standing in. He was standing beside the middle-aged man in green robe, frowning faintly. He was very different from the rest of the military generals and civil officials on the ship. The other young man made everyone's eyes brighten. They could not help but marvel at the fact that there was such a handsome man in the world. Wearing a white robe and a jade belt, he stood against the wind like a god or an immortal, enough to make others feel ashamed of their inferiority. The four people closest to the bow of the ship were Cao Changqing, Zhang Enai, Xie Shibian, and Song Maolin. At present, Xie Shibian's reputation in the imperial court of Liang was extremely great. Even the common people had heard that an extraordinary genius general had emerged from the rebel army of West Chu. He had the bearing of a soldier of the spring and autumn period, Yi Baikuei. As for Song Maolin, although he was a late bloomer in the imperial court of West Chu, he was not inferior to Xie Shibian, who had established brilliant military achievements. The two of them, one in civil and the other in military, were known as the twin jade annulus of the Chu. Because of Song Maolin's outstanding appearance, he was like an immortal banished from the world. In addition to his brilliant literary talent, other than being known as the twin jade annulus of the Chu, he was also known as the Northern Su and the Southern Song dynasty together with the Northwest vassal king. Song Maolin was born into a rich and powerful family, so he was probably a true proud son of heaven. The main pillar of West Chu, Cao Changqing, whose hair was even more white, suddenly turned his head to Xie Shibian and laughed in a low voice. "What's wrong?" It wasn't easy to chase away Song Li, but in the end, Chen Jibao from the east came to the Qingzhou Navy, Wu Zhongshuan from the south, and Lu Xingxiang from the north is also truly in control of military power. "Do you think the fierce battle has just begun?" Xie Shibian said softly. "If General Ko was still here, it would be much better." Cao Changqing laughed casually. "Don't worry about that guy. He has a big temper. Yes, and his heart is not small either." Xie Shibian was silent, as if he was afraid of something taboo. Cao Changqing sighed. "Last year, old Grand Preceptor Sun said that West Chu was a burden to me, Chao Chongqing. Today, I also want to say something to you. It is I, Chao Chongqing, who is a burden to you, my student. Xianxia shook his head. Teacher, you must not think this way. I have been a citizen of Dechu for generations. Dechu was born in Xianxia, and I am willing to die for it. Chao Chongqing suddenly laughed. There's a young man who should really get to know you. Only then will he know what it means to be a scholar. That guy, back in the day, had a lot of resentment towards the scholars. In Gangnam-do, the first time he saw Tongxi's sword Immortal Lu Baijia, he asked, Teacher, can you sell me a few pounds of benevolence, righteousness, and morals? When he saw me, he did not have a good expression either. Xianxia was puzzled. But I have seen Bailiang's various actions. They have established academies within their borders and are very kind to scholars. The new Prince of Liang does not seem like this kind of person. Chao Chongqing smiled knowingly. Perhaps it is because a man has a burden on his shoulders, so he cannot do as he pleases. No matter what, Su Fengyin is indeed the most interesting young man I have seen in my life. There is no one like him. Afterwards, Chao Zhongqing suddenly laughed to himself and said in self-mockery, Even if I, Chao Zhongqing, praise him like this, Su Fengyin wouldn't feel the slightest bit of honor. After all, he is the #1 vassal king of Liang who commands 300,000 cavalry. And, at the same time, he is also a martial arts grandmaster on par with me, Chao Guanzi. So no matter how many good words I say, it can only be considered as mutual appreciation. To be honest, when I first saw that kid a few years ago, I never would have thought that the situation would be like today. If I had known, I would have beaten him up back then. Now that I'm talking about it with you, it is easier to brag. Xianxia felt a little sad for no reason. Although his teacher was always easy to get along with, he was not such a talkative elder. Chao Chongqing seemed to have seen through Xianxia's thoughts. He patted the young man's shoulder and smiled. When young people do young things, it is fine to be frivolous. There is no harm in saying that you are worried about new words. When you're 30, you can do things that are responsible. As for people like me who are old, they should honestly admit that they are old. Occasionally taking advantage of my seniority is one of the few pleasures in life. Chapter 15-17. Xianxia forced a smile. Dechu was most proud of Mr. Chao. Would he grow old? Chao Chongqing lowered his voice and said, That guest will secretly come in the evening. You and Song Maolin will stay by my side. You don't have to do anything. Xianxia asked worriedly, Why does the current Duke of Yinsheng, a saint family with a history of more than 800 years, want to meet you? I don't understand. What else is there to say? Chao Chongqing did not immediately give an answer. Lu Songtao, who became a Buddha in Lantan Mountain, came to him to persuade him to let it go. That Duke of Yinsheng should be the same. Kings and officials can decide life and death with a word. Scholars like us are full of hot blood and have nothing to fear. However, if there was someone who could decide whether a person's name would be passed down through the ages or go down in infamy, wouldn't they calm down and think about it carefully? Chao Chongqing looked at the sky and muttered, When one has to let go of one's country, one can only let go. Jianghu can also be let go, but some things can't be let go even if I want to. No matter how much I read and how much I know, it is still the same. Xianxia was mentally wandering. If one day he could fight the Bailiang cavalry on the battlefield, he would have no regrets even if he died. But such an opportunity would not appear. Jiang and I walked to a secluded place and looked at the rolling waves of the river alone. Song Maolin hesitated for a moment and came to her side. He said softly, Princess. Jiang and I, who had her back facing this immortal, did not move. She pretended not to hear and let Song Maolin know to leave. Song Maolin smiled bitterly. Princess, I only have one thing to say. I will leave after that. Jiang and I could only turn her head and said calmly, Speak. Song Maolin's voice was warm as he said softly, I can guess where you went and who you met a while ago. I don't dare to say anything. I only hope that you will not take such risks in the future. There are many things in the world that should be done by men. There is no reason for women to help. Jiang and I made an O sound. Unfortunately, she did not say anything else. Song Maolin smiled and left. But the next moment, Song Maolin was pleasantly surprised. The princess actually called his name. He suppressed the excitement in his heart and slowly turned around. Jiang and I smiled. Someone asked me to pass a message to you. He said that the next time he sees you, he will definitely beat you up until you can't recognize anyone. Jiang and I felt that he was already very kind. He changed the words father and mother to something that didn't hurt their relationship. Song Maolin's face stiffened as if he was struck by lightning. Poor exiled deity. On the border between Beimeng and Liangliao, a group of armored cavalry troops roared past right under the noses of the Liang border's military sentries. The leader was the newest commander of Beimeng's Eastern Front. He was a legendary figure who was somewhat similar to the Xianxia remnant that Hongjia ran north into Beimeng, but was also very different. This old man did not settle down in the Southern Dynasty. Instead, he traveled alone in the grasslands of Beimeng. It was similar to how the Taiping Emperor traveled in Liang. Although he was almost 50 years old, the armored old man still did not look old. One could vaguely see that he must have been a first-class handsome man when he was young. It was no wonder that in the past 10 years, he had been involved in many affairs. Even the Beimeng palace heard that there was an unknown old man who had seduced many noble ladies. When this guy suddenly became the commander of the Eastern Front, the entire Beimeng suddenly realized that it was him, Wang Sui. Along with Yi Baikue, Su Xiao, and Gu Jiantang, Wang Sui was known as the four great generals of the spring and autumn period. He was the youngest and most unruly prince consort of Dongyue. Unlike Yi Baikue, who was victorious in every battle, he had only lost once. Unlike Su Xiao, who was the ultimate winner, he had actually suffered many defeats. Unlike Gu Jiantang, who was suspected of not living up to his name, Wang Sui was truly undefeated on the battlefield he was in. The fall of Dongyue was attributed to the self-destruction of the city by the imperial court of Dongyue. It was Li Yang's plan to sow discord. He removed Wang Sui's commander-in-chief title, and Wang Sui himself gracefully abdicated and disappeared without a trace. After Wang Sui followed Dong Zhuo, Yang Yuanzhan, and Lu Gue as the main general of another front in Beimeng. Unlike the three who each had their own personal troops, Wang Sui casually rode an old horse to the border to take up his post. In the mountainous eastern front of Beimeng, Wang Sui did not promote or demote anyone boldly, nor did he treat people kindly and drink with the generals. He was like an outsider who had run over to watch a show. He did not care about anything and did not meddle in any military affairs. Every day, Wang Sui narrowed his eyes and strolled blindly among the various armies with his hands behind his back. This made the old forces who were originally uneasy or full of resentment dumbfounded. Then, the generals of Beimeng became anxious. Umatharf *Ker, doing nothing all day long. When the time comes, His Majesty will misunderstand that we are working together to ostracize you. If we, the old men, suffer such a great grievance for no reason, who can we find a reason with? Thus, someone suggested to have Wang Sui hold a military parade at the border. At the very least, he would be able to have a taste of being the number one figure in the Eastern Front Army. This would be compensation for this old man's understanding of the situation. Thus, today's scene of all the generals on the Eastern Front of Beimeng had come out. However, many of the old generals of Beimeng's border army and the older generals glanced at the fellow who was surrounded not far away from them with a cold smile. Wang Sui's awe-inspiring might was just for show. Wang Sui, in addition to the personal guards and elite cavalry that were randomly assembled by various factions, also had the personal attendants of Qiujubo, de Rujubo, de Rujubo, de Rujubo, de Rujubo, de Rujubo, de Rujubo, de Rujubo to Jingshong, as well as 4 to 5 young and strong captains by his side. The Eastern Front of Beimeng claimed to have an army of 300,000, but in fact, it was only a little more than 200,000. There were 23 generals. Above them, there were 2 Beimeng generals who were not as famous as Lu Gue and Yang Yuanzhan. This cannot be helped. In the Southern Dynasty, the Bailiang cavalry could fight each other from afar and fight a few tough battles from time to time. However, on the peaceful Eastern Front, they could only confront the 2 big turtles, Zhao Sui The Prince of Jiaodong and Gu Jiantang one after another. There was no military merit to be gained. Now, the situation was even worse. Under the secret instructions of the imperial decree of peace, the Eastern Front could only be defeated again and again. The two generals only felt that their old faces had been disgraced. Wang Sui suddenly pulled the reins and stopped his horse. The entire army could only stop their horses. Chapter 15:18. The large-scale cavalry army of 10,000 people suddenly went from advancing rapidly to being completely still in an instant. This made Wang Sui, who was sitting high up on his horse and looking around, click his tongue. However, his sloppy and slippery appearance inevitably made people wonder if this old fellow was really praising them. During this period of time, many Kiliarchs who had seen their commander from a distance were puzzled. Was this old fellow really a top-notch general of the Central Plains like the butcher old Prince Liang? Was he really not a swindler who came from some small corner to eat and drink for free? Did His Imperial Majesty accidentally use the wrong person? Wang Sui turned his head to look at the two young generals. With a smug smile, he said, "The military strength of the soldiers of the Central Plains has been declining day by day since the end of the Great Feng Dynasty. In the later stages of the Spring and Autumn War, they were so miserable that Northern Han could match your cavalry in 3 steps. Tragic, truly tragic. If it were up to me, it would be fortunate that Li Yang obtained the Central Plains. Otherwise, your Beimang would have taken advantage of the chaos to invade the south and unify the world. As for Liang, how did it succeed? Su Zhao's Su family army being able to fight was one thing. But that was not the most important thing. Rather, the existence of Su Xiao and the Su family army set an example for Li Yang, allowing the generals to understand one thing. Oh, Mother of Asterisker, war could be fought so fiercely, and people could die so easily. Why else would it be said that Buddha strives for a stick of incense, and man strives for dignity? As a result, a large number of young and strong generals who dared to fight and die appeared in the Liang dynasty. There was nothing to be done. Even if they could not compare to Su Xiao, they could not be too far off, right? The previous 2 emperors of Liang, without mentioning anything else, had good eyesight. In my early years, I, Wang Sui, fought 4 battles with Su Xiao on the northern border of Dongwu. Of course, I definitely won all of them. Hearing this, several generals in the prime of their lives subconsciously swallowed. When they looked at this old fellow again, they suddenly felt that his stature was very tall and his aura was very strong. The sunlight shone on the old man's armor, dazzling their eyes for a moment. This was someone who had defeated Su Xiao. Moreover, he had won 4 battles in a row. Over the past 20 years, which general in Beimang dared to claim to be a match for the old Prince Liang? General Lu Gui was powerful enough, but he was only considered half a Su Xiao by His Majesty. Wang Sui continued, "Of course, back then, I always fought against them with numbers. The greatest disparity in numbers was when I fought against Su Zhao's 600 people with 4,000 people. Over 500 people from Su Zhao's side died. Those generals who had just started to admire the old man almost couldn't help but jump off their horses and curse him. But Wang Sui continued unhurriedly. If I remember correctly, those 600 old soldiers from Jinzhou are the backbone of Beiliang's 3 old battalions." Everyone was horrified. Wang Sui chuckled. "The greatest disparity in numbers was when I, Wang Sui, had 3,000 people and Su Xiao had 1,900 people. I won with a great victory and only lost 600 people. Su Xiao suffered a crushing defeat and lost his capital again. That was why he had to run to the Ministry of War Yamen in Liang to wait in the rain." Not only were the generals and the Kiliarchs quietly approaching, but even the 2 generals of autumn and winter were listening attentively, their emotions surging. Wang Sui asked and answered his own question. "Am I, Wang Sui, really a godlike commander? Among the generals of the spring and autumn period, I probably am. But if anyone thinks that old man, Su Xiao, is useless, then they are gravely mistaken. Su Xiao is the truly powerful one. So what if he loses many battles? He can always win the last battle, and that is enough. When a general leads an army on the battlefield, don't learn from Yi Bai Kuei. You have to learn from Su Xiao. Wang Sui looked around at the faces that weren't too unfamiliar. He chuckled and said, "An army isn't afraid of losing battles or dying people. As long as there is that soul, even a tiger won't fall, let alone an army made up of thousands of soldiers." Wang Sui smiled. "I don't know how many of you here are truly dead set on dying for that old woman. But I know that Beiliang has 300,000 border soldiers who are truly willing to die for those two people." Wang Sui's eyes suddenly sharpened. "After I arrived at the Eastern Front, I've been eating and waiting for death. That's because I, Wang Sui, don't think much of Gu Jiantang or the two Liao defense lines. What I really want to fight is the Beiliang cavalry." Wang Sui suddenly asked in a deep voice, "Who is willing to help me take down Ji province and then go to Yu province to experience Yan 101's infantry?" The generals looked at each other. Wasn't this a clear slap to the face of the king of the southern courtyard, Dongjua? Wasn't this general afraid of angering his majesty and the order of peace? Wang Sui returned to his frivolous appearance. He curled his lips and said, "Looks like no one is willing." If it was a simple and crude method of provocation, these military generals who could become great commanders in northern Mang naturally wouldn't be moved. Even more so, wouldn't be so hot-blooded as to run from the Eastern Front to Ji province just because of this old fella's few words. But things were far from that simple. No matter how the Liang court viewed the Battle of Liangmang, Beimang itself was already full of worries. They were all looking forward to someone breaking the deadlock on a certain battlefield. Dongju Bo Wang Jingchong was the first to break the silence. He asked in a deep voice, "Dare I ask, General, what if someone blames you for your crimes after this?" Wang Sui laughed coldly. "Blames my ass. If you're still afraid, then I, Wang Sui, will say something right here and now. I, Wang Sui, will bear all the consequences." Wang Sui laughed without the slightest scruple. "Even so, it's not difficult for you guys who don't have balls to take down Ji province, which has lost all its elites. But can you really go challenge Yin Wenluan of Yuzhou? I think it's difficult." Wang Jingchong laughed. "Then this general will have balls for once." Wang Sui narrowed his eyes and stared at this remnant of the spring and autumn period who had left his homeland at a young age. He said slowly, "This, you can really have them." Qiubo Daru Shui also laughed. "Actually, this general's thing is not small. It's just that I don't usually see beautiful women, so I'm too lazy to show off. Since there are people from Ji province in Yuzhou today, then I'll have to show off my weapon." Wang Sui ignored the two Qiubo Da. "There's no need to rush. I'll give you half a day to weigh the pros and cons. If you need to discuss with your elders, then hurry up. After half a day, if you don't want to stay on the Eastern Front, feel free to come find me. All right, don't forget to bring good wine. I know you've hidden a lot of good stuff. In the future, follow me, Wang Sui, and fight with your lives on the line. Give me a few jars of good wine today. If you don't dare, I'll return you to being a great general tomorrow. It won't be difficult for everyone to be promoted." Wang Sui looked to the east and spat heavily. Then the old man turned his horse around and slowly moved forward. He looked in the direction of Beiliang in the distance. "I heard you had nothing better to do than wander around Jianghu." "Little Jianghu? So what if you can fight 10,000 people alone? Can you compare to the golden spears and armored horses on the battlefield? Can you compare to the heroic sacrifice of hundreds of thousands of armored men? How can Su Zhao's son be so petty? Su Fingyan, back then, your father was completely defeated by me in Jianzhou. If you're really capable, then come find me to settle the score. If you lose, then obediently accept your fate. If you can win, then this world should belong to you, Su Fingyan." Chapter 1519. Beiliang's Jianghu had never been so lively before. Under Xianyuan Qingfeng's influence, many Jianghu heroes had rushed north to the border. At this time, Mount Wudong was going to hold a new debate between Buddhism and Taoism. This gave many Jianghu people who didn't want to get involved in Liangmang's battle a way out. They didn't want to get involved in the mess, but they just took a detour to Mount Wudong to watch the fun. They didn't want to annoy the Liang imperial court, right? Everyone knew that the scenery of the 81 peaks was spectacular. Moreover, Ancestor Liu and the immortal Hong Xixiang, who rode a crane to Jiangnan, were both cultivating there. It was good to get some immortal qi. For a time, the number of foreigners pouring into Yu and Liang provinces was as large as carps crossing the river. As the local tyrant of Beiliang, the Fish Dragon Gang not only took the initiative to lead the way for the Jianghu Friends under the leadership of gang leader Lunarong, but also took care of all the necessities. Moreover, if someone didn't want to travel with others, they could get a lot of money from the Fish Dragon Gang with their travel pass. As for whether they really went to Mount Wudong, the rich Fish Dragon Gang wouldn't really care if they went to the brothel to get drunk or to have a good meal halfway through the journey. This imperceptibly raised the status of the Fish Dragon Gang in the Central Plains. It was true that the Fish Dragon Gang didn't have many top masters, but it couldn't stop their wealth. If you wanted to live comfortably in Jianghu, didn't you need to rely on your fists and money? Otherwise, did you think you were the handsome king of Beiliang? It was said that before he started practicing martial arts, he used only his face to make more than 10 female heroes who came to Mount Xinliang to seek revenge fall in love at first sight. Since then, they were willing to stay in the Wutong Inn of the king's mansion as his mistress. The number of martial arts masters could be counted with one hand. The peach blossom sword god Dong Tai was too elusive. The great official Chao Chongqing was not young after all. Tuoba Bodhisattva was a Beimang barbarian who was born unlikable. Therefore, Su Fengnian, who was in his prime and had many magnificent achievements, became the most interesting topic of conversation for the Jianghu people in Liang. The king of Beiliang was full of praises for the king of Beiliang's signature products, especially those shops that sold rouge and face powder. They swore solemnly that Su Fengnian had bought things for his close female friends. What made the young heroes and young masters most indignant was that these shops were obviously deceiving people, but the accompanying female heroes and fairies seemed to have been possessed and bought a lot of extremely expensive bottles and jars from those shops. The key point was that the real spendthrifts who spent money like water were none other than these men who protected the flowers. When the Jianghu in Beiliang was bustling, it happened to be the time when the Beiliang custom of rolling willows was at its peak. The sons of the Beiliang rich families would ride horses and shoot arrows in the countryside or in the martial arts arena. They would hang any object on a tree branch and shoot it down. This was called rolling willows. When the foreign Jianghu men saw that many Beiliang women were also familiar with bows and horses, they were inevitably shocked. They had only heard that the Beiliang people were valiant, but now they were sure that the rumors were true. Most of these Beiliang men and women who were rolling willows tied white hemp silk to their arms. After asking around, they found out that the people of Beiliang would tie hemp silk to their dead relatives within a month after they took off their mourning clothes. This was somewhat similar to how the families in the Central Plains tied colorful silk to their arms in the middle of summer to ward off ghosts and diseases. At the same time, this was also shocking. Could it be that Beiliang had really lost so many people in the battles at Huta City in Liangzhou and Heluku in Yuzhou? Why was it that when they were in the Central Plains, they only heard that the Beiliang frontier army either retreated without a fight or collapsed when faced with the million-strong Beimang army? However, they heard that the two Liao provinces under the command of the Great Pillar State, Gu Jiantang, and his son-in-law Yuan Tingshan's Jibei defense line were both filled with victory reports. After entering Beiliang, they saw with their own eyes that other than the Beiliang disciples who were riding and shooting willows that made them feel ashamed of their inferiority, the patrolling cavalry that was transferred from the Beiliang garrison made them feel awe and respect. It was said that these cavalry troops were far weaker than the cavalry troops at the border. If they were really sent out to fight the so-called elite troops in the Central Plains, wouldn't it be like a level 1 expert crushing a level 2 master? When most of the foreign Jianghu men began to climb the mountain or approach Wudong, they heard another two legendary news. The king of Beiliang, Su Fengnian, had led 10,000 Yuzhou cavalry troops to battle outside Heluku. This time, he had broken through the enemy lines outside Huta City and forced the Beimang South Courtyard king, Dong Zhuo, to retreat again and again. As for the infamous Bailiang governor, Chu Lushan, he personally led 8,000 Yuzhou cavalry troops from Huayang Pass to the northeast border of Liuzhou and defeated the Dong family's private army of 30,000. Evil people were hated by everyone, but if this evil person was one of their own, it was actually quite reassuring. Chu Lushan, the evil person who could stop children from crying, was the most suitable person to be placed in Bailiang's border. Not only would he not harm the Central Plains, he could also make the Baimang barbarians worry. In this way, Su Fengnian had become the king of Bailiang, not to mention other merits. Just subduing Fatty Chu and forcing him to stay outside Liangzhou Pass was already a great merit. Su Fengnian, after seeing Chu Lushan and the iron-blooded cavalry, which had suffered heavy casualties for the sake of this Buddhism and Taoism battle, which was supposed to be held 2 years ago on the devil-slaying platform on Longhu Mountain, Su Fengnian specially rushed from Huayang Pass to the border between Liangzhou and Yuzhou. Of course, he did not come to Wudong Mountain to show off. It was because the spy from Fu Shui Fong reported that 2 groups of people were coming to join in the fun. One group was Deng Mao and Yelu Dongchuang, who had followed Luo Yang into Liang. They seemed to have stopped hiding their whereabouts after entering Yuzhou. The other group was even stranger. It was a couple who could be said to be unique in the world. Su Fengnian paid more attention to them than the couple from Huyan Dagwan. This was because the man was the white-robed monk Li Dongxin, who was the abbot of the 2 Zen temples in name. He was also the father of a young girl who had long since decided to become a heroine. The arrival of the white-robed monk greatly justified the debate between Buddhism and Taoism on Little Lotus Peak. Since Li Yufu, the head of Wudong, was not on the mountain, the Taoist who was debating with the Buddhists was a Taoist priest that many people in Bailiang had never heard of. He was a disciple of Song Jiming. It was rumored that he had just built a monastery on Little Pillar Peak. Not all of Wudong's 81 peaks have a Taoist monastery. Most of the peaks have been raised in seclusion and no one knows of them. Currently, Wudong Mountain only had 12 peaks. Among them, the Big and Small Lotus Peaks were the most famous. The Jade Pillar Peak, which was known as the Jade Pillar of Internal Strength, was also quite famous. From this, it could be seen that the Taoist priest named Han Gui, who was regarded as someone who could hold his own, must have some skills. In addition, the Green Mountain Monastery had been funded by the king of Bailiang from Mount Qingliang, and the status of Little Pillar Peak had naturally risen. As one of the ancestral courts of Taoism, Wudong Mountain was separated from Mount Longhu and had been fighting for hundreds of years. Of the few immortals of the highest generation, Wang Zhongluo was the first to pass away. Hong Shixiang, whose cultivation had reached Tongxian, was reincarnated for some unknown reason. Sword maniac Wang Xiaoping, who blocked the way, Wang Xianji, died heroically on the banks of Guangling River. Song Jiming, who had lived for more than 60 years, had also died. Now, only the enlightened priest Chun Yao and the self-deprecating Yu Xingrui, who had self-deprecated, "I can't cultivate immortality, I can only cultivate strength." The latter was also the person who had the foresight to bring Li Yufu up to Wudong from the East Sea. There were about 20 Wudong Taoists of the same generation as Li Yufu and Han Gui. After that, there were more Taoists of the 4 generations, especially the Ling and Zhen generations. Unlike Mount Longhu, which was declining day by day, Wudong Mountain, which had been silent for 100 years, was becoming increasingly prosperous. There were now more than 600 Taoists of the Jin generation, and this was under the premise that Wudong Mountain was not willing to accept disciples indiscriminately. When going up the mountain to burn incense, whether it was the people of Lingzhou or the pilgrims of Ji and He Prefecture, they would usually climb the mountain from the Southern Divine Path, which had the most beautiful scenery and the best route. Su Fengnian had chosen the Northern Divine Path to climb the mountain. He did not expect that he had underestimated the huge appeal of the battle between Buddhism and Taoism. Apart from the 700 to 800 Jianghu people, most of the rich people of Bailiang and the other 3 prefectures had come by car or horse. There were even many people from Huainan and Gangnam-do who had come to burn incense and watch the battle. The Northern Divine Path of Wudong Mountain was not wide to begin with. What was even more unfortunate was that it had started to drizzle early in the morning. The rain was not enough to obstruct the road, but the muddy road was a pain. Coupled with the constant trampling of the people, the rugged road of less than 20 miles was more tiring than 50 miles of the official road. Chapter 1520. This time, Su Fengyin didn't have any retainers following him to Mount Wudong. Because he was in a hurry, he didn't even ride a horse. Instead, he chose a secluded path and flew like a bird, so he didn't look travel-worn. He wore a green robe and had 2 sabers hanging from his waist. One was a soldier that he had stolen from Jiang Fuding, while the other was an ordinary cold saber. At noon, Su Fengyin stopped at a simple and crude restaurant at the entrance to the Northern Divine Road. The name of the restaurant was quite interesting. It was called Passing Village Inn, probably to remind pilgrims who had come from afar that there wouldn't be another shop after passing through this village. The restaurant was already packed with people, all of them hoping to ascend the mountain as soon as possible. Su Fengyin could only sit on a small bamboo stool under the eaves with a dozen or so other people to shelter from the rain. If they wanted to eat hot food or drink hot wine, they had to obediently wait in line. Su Fengyin asked for a pot of tea. The tea was under the banner of Wudong's Taoist tea. For a palm-sized pot of tea, he dared to ask for an exorbitant price of 25 copper coins. Su Fengyin held the pot in one hand and the cup in the other. He drank it all in a few mouthfuls. When he asked the waiter to refill his cup, he had to fork out another 5 copper coins. Obviously, Su Fengyin wasn't the only one who felt that he was being overcharged. The pilgrims around him were also complaining. A few of the younger ones even had a bad impression of Wudong. They said that if a single leaf was like that at the foot of the mountain, then the Wudong Taoist priests on the mountain must be like that as well. From their accents, it was clear that they were all foreigners. Some of the Bailiang pilgrims who often went to the mountain to burn incense frowned. An old man smiled and tried to persuade them. He said that when they went to the mountain to burn incense, even the incense sticks were a gift from Wudong, and they didn't charge a single copper coin. Of course, how much incense money they were willing to pay, whether it was a few copper coins or a few taels, was all up to their ability. The old man also said that since he was young, he would come here to burn incense 3 or 4 times a year, but he had never met a Wudong Taoist who took the initiative to ask him to pay. As soon as the old man opened his mouth, many foreigners who were curious about Wudong Mountain became interested. Some of them asked the old man if he had seen Li Yufu, the leader of Wudong Mountain. The old man laughed and said, "Of course I have. How could I not? Not only Leader Li, but also Leader Wang, who broke the river with one finger, and Leader Hong, who rode a crane to Jiangnan. I have seen them all, especially Leader Hong. I'm not boasting. In fact, there are many pilgrims who have seen these people. If you go up the mountain today, you might meet Jinren Shun or Jinren Yu to interpret the divination for you. Unfortunately, I heard that Headmaster Li went down the mountain to travel. Then is it true that your king of Bailiang once practiced martial arts on Mount Wudong? Of course, I've personally asked 2 Taoists of the Qing generation whom I've been familiar with for many years. It's absolutely true. It's said that our king and Leader Hong have been close friends for a long time. On the mountain, one practiced martial arts and the other practiced Taoism. They trained each other. Their relationship was really good. A young girl from outside asked shyly, "Uncle, is your king of Bailiang really as handsome as the rumors say? How can it be fake? The son of the general and the princess. There's no need to say anything about his appearance." "Haha, little girl, you don't have to be shy. There are many girls in Bailiang who want to marry our king," the old man said, and pointed at Su Fengyin, who was sitting not far away drinking tea. He joked with the young girl, "Look, our king is guaranteed to be as handsome as this young master." Su Fengyin turned his head and smiled helplessly. The young girl's face was red. Su Fengyin took a sip of tea and gently looked into the distance. Just like the Taoist temple where Han Gui lived on Little Pillar Peak, Green Mountain Temple, and Green Mountain Temple, one's state of mind would be different no matter where one was. On the battlefield, with corpses and bones everywhere, one could not help but feel sorrowful. On the other hand, if one was in the forest, it was inevitable that one would develop a somewhat wild state of mind. After personally experiencing the siege of Huda's city and then welcoming Chu Lushan and his 3,000 cavalry and 5,000 corpses back from the border of Liuzhou, Su Fengnian seemed to hear the sound of fighting even though he was already far away from Huda City and Huayang Pass, far away from the sound of war drums and horse hooves. The more peaceful he was, the harder it was for Su Fengnian to let go. There seemed to be an image in his mind. Beiliang's horse head was facing north. The spearhead was facing north. The blade was facing north. 300,000 soldiers at the border, for the barren land behind them, did not hesitate to die to stop Bei Meng's iron hooves. When Lu Jinu parted, he said there was no need to feel guilty. The 60,000 people in Huda City were not fighting for Su Fengnian. They were dying for Beiliang. It was just that Su Fengnian was worthy enough for them to entrust their lives to and let them know that their deaths were worth it. But could Su Fengnian really not feel guilty? He could not do it. The people under the eaves saw two men coming from afar. One was stocky and the other was short. Because they were not eye-catching, they only glanced at them and did not pay them much attention. Su Fengnian slowly got up and called for the waiter to return the teapot and teacup. Then he stood at the edge of the stairs, right on the line between rain and no rain. When he made this seemingly unintentional move, the two visitors from afar also slowed down. But for the pilgrims under the eaves of the restaurant who were waiting to eat, this kind of peak confrontation between two people who were not in the first class and did not understand the mystery was not noticed at all. Behind Su Fengnian, people were drinking tea, chatting, and resting. They were completely unaware of the turbulent situation that was surging like a tide hitting the city wall. Although the two men slowed down, they still walked toward the restaurant. They seemed to be walking like ordinary people, but in fact, one of them did not even touch the ground and did not touch the mud at all. The younger man seemed to be carrying 1,000 pounds of weight. When he stepped on the ground, even the tops of his shoes sank into the yellow mud. Seeing that they had no intention of stopping, Su Fengnian narrowed his eyes. His right hand pressed on the handle of the soldier crossing the river, and he was about to step on the stairs. The middle-aged man was the first to stop. The young man beside him wanted to continue, but his companion suddenly reached out and stopped him. The young man's face was full of indignation. He stared at the guy and muttered in a low voice in the slightly awkward Mandarin of the Central Plains, "Do you think you're so great just because you fought old Monster Wong and Tooba, Bodhisattva?" Then the arrogant young man sighed. "Well, you're quite great." He shouted at the top of his voice, "Hey, you know we're not here to fight. How can you treat your guests like this?" Su Fengnian looked at this young man, who was considered short even among the men south of Liyang's Guangling River, let alone the tall men of the northern lands. His true identity was Yelu Dongchuang, a true and proper member of Northern Mang's noble family. Simply speaking, if that puppet crown prince were to die one day, then this fellow would be the same as Murong Longshui, a member of the royal family with the greatest hope of becoming Northern Mang's next emperor. Because of Jia, Su Fengnian played a game of cat and mouse with Murong Longshui and Old Moth, the leader's spiderweb. She was quite an interesting woman. For some reason, Yelu Dongchuang swaggered along with Luo Yang to Zhulu Mountain. As for the broken spear Deng Mao, whose ranking in Beimang was similar to that of Hong Jingyan, he should be the personal retinue of the former emperor's nephew of Beimang. To be precise, this was the second time Su Fengnian and Yelu Dongchuang met. That was when Gao Shulu woke up after being sealed in the mountain for 400 years. Su Fengnian went on an out-of-body spiritual journey and met with the celestial being. At that time, Yelu Dongchuang, who ran errands for Luo Yang, and Su Fengnian barely met each other. Chapter 1521. Su Fengnian smiled, retracted his steps, and sat back down on the stool. Deng Mao and Yelu Dongbed were finally able to climb up the steps and come under the eaves. It wasn't that Deng Mao didn't have the ability, but since he didn't have the heart to fight to the death, Deng Mao wasn't the kind of person who would look for trouble. As for Yelu Dongbed, against the current Su Fengnian, if the latter wanted to make him unable to take a single step closer to the restaurant, he, as a member of the Beimang royal family, really didn't have the ability. The soles of Yelu Dongbed's shoes scraped the edge of the steps, scraping away a thick layer of dirt, before he sat down next to Su Fengnian. Deng Mao didn't sit down because the restaurant only had one stool available. Yalu Dongbed lowered his voice and asked, "Did you really fight with Tuoba Bodhisattva? What was the result? I want to hear the truth." Su Fingyin said to this overly familiar fellow, "Is Su Ying well?" Yalu Dongbed was stunned. "Su Ying? Who?" Su Fingyin finally smiled a little and said softly, "The girl who likes to wear red robes by Luo Yang's side." Yalu Dongbed said, "Oh, she's just like that. In the past, she was neither human nor ghost. Later, she went crazy and cut off her own face. Now, she looks like a normal girl. But when she has nothing to do, she still likes to wander around there by herself. That red robe can go around for almost an hour in one breath. Anyways, it makes my eyes dizzy and my heart tired." Su Fingyin didn't say anything. Yalu Dongchuang was startled. "What, you like this kind of thing?" Su Fingyin didn't turn his head to look at this blabbermouth young man. He only asked indifferently, "You're not afraid of dying here?" Yalu Dongbed rolled his eyes. In the next moment, Yalu Dongbed didn't even dare to breathe loudly. The people under the eaves did not notice that at that moment, the handsome young master with the twin sabers had swayed a little. The middle-aged man with an ordinary appearance had already left the eaves to soak himself in the rain, and then returned to the eaves to stand still. They were just wondering how the man with his back to the restaurant had unknowingly turned to face them. Su Fingyin whispered, "There won't be a next time." Yalu Dongchuang smiled bitterly. "I've only heard that you're quite humorous, and you don't seem like someone who can't take a joke. It seems that as long as a person becomes an expert, he will put on airs." Su Fingyin shook his head and said, "If you change your identity and go there one day, you will know the reason." It wasn't clear whether Yalu Dongbed truly understood or was just pretending to understand. "I understand." Su Fingyin waved his hand and asked the waiter for a pot of tea and 3 cups. The astute waiter glanced at the short man squatting in the latrine and refused with a straight face. He said that he had to buy 2 pots of tea, but he could also lend him a small stool. Su Fingyin smiled and agreed. He directly pinched out a piece of broken silver from his money pouch. It was about 60 copper coins. Besides, in this world, silver was always expensive and copper was cheap. Only then did the waiter grin. This brother, he knew the rules. Later, Deng Mao finally had the opportunity to sit down. If the truth of this spread to the Jianghu, this waiter would probably be the most arrogant man in the world. He haggled with Su Fingyin, the king of Bailiang, rolled his eyes at Yalu Dongbed, and rewarded Deng Mao with a stool. Su Fingyin poured a cup of tea for each of the Baimang men on his left and right. He asked, "What business do you have in Bailiang?" Yalu Dongbed didn't keep him in suspense. "Luo Yang told me to tell you that other than Chao Chongqing and Duke Yansheng, who helped persuade Emperor Liang, there's no need to call off the 3-year agreement." Yalu Dongbed took a sip of the tasteless tea and continued, "Also, I wanted to see you. I wanted to know if there was a possibility that we could do something together." Su Fingyin was a bit absent-minded. He looked at the light curtain of rain outside the eaves and took a deep breath. He calmly said, "Tell me." Yalu Dongbed said self-deprecatingly, "In my family, many relatives around my age have died in recent years. Of course, most of them have the same surname as me. As for that, well, those who have my aunt's surname, most of them are women, like that fat girl Morong Longshui. So to tell the truth, I still have a chance. Even if it's not big, it's still there. The reason I snuck out, to tell you the truth, is to avoid that chess and sword music school boss who's making a comeback. There's no other way. That old man was actually chased out of Liang by my grandfather. This time, he's come back for a surprise attack. Of course, it's not as simple as just giving me a hard time. The old man values my older brother more. The reason is that he would find a dog to guard a house, not a wolf cub. I know that the current situation of Liang Mang's stalemate is ultimately the idea of 2 people, the old man and Fatty Dong. Not everyone thinks so." Su Fingyin said with a half-smile, "Show some sincerity, okay?" Yalu Dongbed laughed. His voice was even softer as he slowly said, "At the very least, I know that 6 out of the 8 governors and 12 great generals are firmly against it. As for Helian Wu and the others, it's up to them to fight Liang Mang. It's hard to say that they're fence-sitters. In any case, they're just going with the flow. Of course, my parents died a long time ago, but my grandfather is still alive. Although he's not a great general or governor, he's still comparable to a great general and a governor, right? Su Fingyin was familiar with the inside story of the Beimang royal court. He shook his head and said, "That's not all." Yalu Dongbed turned his head and stared at the side of the young king's face. He asked, "Do you want to do this deal?" Su Fingyin asked back, "Other than wanting me to defeat Dong Zhuo and the governor of Taiping's momentum, what else do you want me to do?" Yalu Dongbed laughed foolishly. "First of all, you have to kill Toba Bodhisattva. Secondly, you have to do your best to protect the main force of the Hong Jingyan Ruren cavalry on the battlefield." Su Fingyin said mockingly, "You should really go to the battlefield and see. Then you wouldn't have to make it sound so easy." Yalu Dongbed laughed. "If it were anyone else, I wouldn't even mention this, but you can. That's why I'm sitting here today, drinking 20 copper coins for a pot of good tea." Su Fingyin asked, "You want to be the emperor that much?" Yalu Dongbed asked back, "You don't want to?" Su Fingyin laughed it off. Yalu Dongbed quietly waited for him to continue. Su Fingyin finally said, "I can only promise you that we'll take it one step at a time." Yalu Dongbed slapped his thigh. "That's enough." Yalu Dongbed placed the teacup by his feet. As he bent down and stood up, he said softly, "If the two of us can reach that step, I can also promise you one thing. Half of the southern dynasty can be considered as me, Yalu Dongbed, returning the money for your tea. Once both sides of Liangmang are done, and if you still have the intention of heading south to the Central Plains, I can even lend you the entire Eastern Front for 3 years. I can help you suppress the Liang border army for 3 years." Su Fingyin watched the two of them leave. The tea had cooled. After Yalu Dongbed and Deng Mao had walked more than 10 li, Yalu Dongbed asked, "Do you think he'll agree?" Deng Mao said expressionlessly, "Why wouldn't he agree? Other than the matter of Hong Jingyan's Ruren cavalry, everything else is something Su Fingyin should do. As long as Dong Zhuo and the Taiping magistrate are still working together to control the court, Liangmang is a dead end, and the chances of Su Fingyin's Bailiang winning are too small." Yalu Dongbed crossed his arms behind his head and sighed. "That's right. It seems like he can only accompany me in this gamble, and can only help me once. Rather than fighting to the death with my million-strong army without any chance of victory, it's better to do everything in his power to ruin Dong Zhuo and the Taiping magistrate's reputation. At the very least, it'll be relatively easier. As long as I can force these two fellows to weaken in one spur of energy, I won't even need to exhaust myself. It'll be equivalent to winning an opportunity for me. When the time comes, it'll depend on my ability and destiny." Deng Mao hesitated for a moment, then asked, "If you really succeed, dividing the world between the North and the South?" The dwarf's lips cracked into a soundless smile, revealing a savagery and bloodthirstiness that had not been seen in the last 20 years of the Yalu surname. And under the eaves of that restaurant, Su Fingyin's lips twitched. Su Fingyin stood up and walked down the steps, beginning to step onto the northern divine path of Mount Wudong. So what if such a person became the Emperor of Beimang? Chapter 1522. The rain gradually stopped, and the sun gradually rose. Su Fingyin began to climb the mountain. He passed by Zhanlongguan, Nyangzi Slope, and Yellow Monkey Ridge, and then passed by Huqiao Mound to Legong Stream. Su Fingyin saw several groups of pilgrims at Legong Stream. Most of them were resting on the rocks by the stream, swallowing the snacks they brought with them. After all, the mountain path was muddy, which was the best way to eat people's strength. Among the groups of people, there were some pampered young masters and young ladies who appeared to be extremely tired. A few young women were gently beating their calves, complaining to their companions that the scenery of this Shinto path was too different from the reputation of Mount Wudong. They said that the shabby Taoist temples from before were unbearably narrow. At first glance, it was obvious that it was not a place that could accommodate immortals. Those Taoist masters in the mountain also did not have any sage-like demeanor. As for the moving scenery of Mount Wudong that was like lotus peaks and bamboo shoots, they did not even see a shadow of it. Along the way, the scenery along the way could not be said to be barren and unruly, but really could not be compared to the beautiful scenery of the Taoist paradise. Su Fengyin picked a relatively secluded place by the stream and sat down. The ancient trees towered into the sky, and the shade was dense. Although he did not do anything out of the ordinary, the dual sabers on his waist were actually quite eye-catching, especially for the locals who knew their stuff. When they saw the Baoyang sabers, their eyes became a bit more complicated. Nowadays, in Baoyang, those who secretly carried cold sabers, regardless of their family background, were all arrested and imprisoned. Therefore, Su Fengyin was regarded as a member of the army. This was actually normal. Wudong Lotus Peak was hosting a huge Buddhist debate, so Baoyang's military would certainly arrange for capable people to keep an eye on the situation to prevent negligence. Su Fengyin suddenly looked up and saw a pair of acquaintances walking over together. They were the Taoist master of Qingshan Monastery, Han Gui, with whom he had once discussed Tao on Shaozhu Peak, and his disciple, Qing Xian. Su Fengyin hurriedly got up to greet him. Towards this Taoist priest who was favored by Wang Zhongluo and Hong Shixiang, Su Fengyin had a very good impression of him. He felt that he was fully deserving of being called a person of the mountain. Han Gui wholeheartedly cultivated the Tao. Cultivating the heart was also cultivating the truth. Based on Su Fengyin's status as a vassal king, Zhang Luzhenren Xinyao or Yu Xingrui should have rushed to the foot of the mountain to personally welcome him, but they still let the junior Taoist priest Han Gui be in charge of this matter. This was probably the unique feature of Wudong Mountain. Not only it did not make people feel neglected, on the contrary, it made people smile. If he was climbing the mountain together with the two elderly Taoist priests, although the ceremony had arrived, other than the longer the mountain path, the more difficult it would be for him to exchange pleasantries. What else could he say? How boring that would be. When Han Gui saw Su Fengyin, he smiled and cupped his fists in the manner of a Taoist welcoming a guest. He did not spoil the mood by calling out his identity. Su Fengyin lightly cupped his fists in return. The young Taoist child Qing Xian, who was not old but had a high seniority, did not get to see Lulong, who he used to play with on the mountain. His face was full of disappointment. When the heavens obtained Lulong, the earth obtained Liolong's peace. When the gods obtained Lulong, they obtained Lulong. The old Taoist master Wang Zhongluo and his Shidi had the highest seniority, followed by the current Taoist master Li Yufu and Han Gui's generation of Taoist priests. Afterwards, according to the passage in the Taoist Saints book, there were 4 generations, Qing Ning and Ling Zhen. Therefore, even if the Taoist priests of the Zhen generation on the mountain were not young, when they saw Qing Xian, the little Taoist priest of Qingshan Monastery, they still had to call her great-grand marshal uncle or great-grand marshal uncle. If this little Taoist priest, who was of the same seniority as the direct disciple of the Wudong leader, Yu Fu, would probably be called Little Immortal. Han Gui sat beside Su Fengyin and smiled. The white-robed monks of the Tu-Zin Temple have already ascended the mountain from the southern divine path. The current celestial master of the celestial master residence of Longhum Mountain, Zhao Ningxin, and Master Qinglian Baiyu are also on their way. Su Fengyin said with some surprise, Zhao Ningxin is willing to support and come all the way to Baoyang? I have a big grudge with this Yui minister. Han Gui had never traveled down the mountain. On the mountain, she had always concentrated on learning and did not care about worldly affairs. Therefore, she had never heard of the earth-shattering battle of the immortals on the Spring God Lake. She was not interested in the conflict between the yellow-purple noble, who had the same surname as the emperor and the young king. She skipped the topic and said softly, there are no less than 100 famous scholars from the Huainan Dao and Gangnam-do. They are also traveling together and will be climbing the mountain at dusk tonight. Su Fengyin nodded and said with a smile, spies have mentioned this. It's really hard for these elegant scholars to stay in Baoyang for half a day. Su Fengyin knew that the 3 people who could make this group of arrogant scholars take the initiative to come to Baoyang were Song Dongming, who was once one of the prime ministers of Liang, Yin Song, who retired at the age of 79 and returned to his hometown, and then came to Wudong with his family to burn incense, and Han Guzi, who led a group of disciples to travel to the border. These 3 people's contributions could not go unnoticed. If they did not take the lead, Even if there was the scene of the scholar going to save the country, it would not have moved this group of noble scholars who grew up in the rich land of fish and rice in the Central Plains. Strange things happened. Su Fengyin instantly slid from one side of the stream to the other. Even though he was attacked by such a fierce sneak attack, Su Fengyin still did not have the intention to pull out his saber. The little Taoist child Xianxia, who only felt a gust of wind raging in his ears, opened his eyes wide and saw a tall woman in a simple and elegant dress beside him and his master. She was young and very beautiful, but her face was too cold. Compared to the time when the old Taoist priest accidentally tasted the food he cooked, her face was much worse. The little Taoist child saw the strange sister squinting her eyes, which were long and slender like the bamboo leaves on the mountain. The pilgrims near the stream were first stunned, but soon there were some quick-tempered busybodies who cheered loudly. In their field of vision, the ripples on the water surface caused by the young man with the saber gradually dissipated. A man and a woman stood opposite each other on both sides of the stream. A handsome man and a beautiful woman, and each of them had the bearing of a master. No matter how they looked at it, there was a story to be told between the two of them. This immediately made the pilgrims who were bored to death on the mountain road excited. They could not wait for the two of them to fight until the mountains collapsed and the earth split. Of course, it would be best for them to reveal their identities and sex before fighting, report their Jianghu nicknames, and talk about their love and hatred, and then fight to the death. This way, their trip to Wudong would not be in vain. In fact, Su Fengyin, who took the initiative to back down, asked with a smile, "Didn't you return to Mount Hui?" The woman who was not wearing purple today sneered and said, "If the interest keeps on rolling, it will be too late for me to collect the debt. Even you may not be able to pay it back." Perhaps they felt that the couple was too young and unfamiliar. Even if their martial arts cultivation was good, there was a limit to it. Very soon, some impatient spectators shouted at the top of their lungs, "Fight! Why aren't you fighting? Fight well! Fight well! We'll immediately go back to the Jianghu and say some good words for you two." Some people who did not know what was good for them shouted, "Hurry up! The two of you can't just talk and not fight." The Taoist priest Han Gui sighed softly. He only hoped that if Su Fengyin really fought with the strange woman, he would not be implicated. So at this time, he took his disciple and walked into the crowd. It looked like they were taking refuge, but in fact, they were helping to block the disaster. Chapter 1523. At this time, there were already people who claimed to be from Jianghu talking about it. They explained to the layman that there were 9 levels of martial arts in the world. In the end, they all revolved around the 7 words of skin, flesh, tendons, bones, body, qi, and spirit. Only when one reached the 2nd level of Master Realm could one touch the threshold of qi. For example, when a swordsman reached the 2nd level, he could barely control qi and fly a sword. The handsome young master with the twin sabers at his waist was repelled, sliding from the stream to the other side. However, his calves were not soaked. This clearly showed that he was in the 4th level realm or even the 3rd level realm. It could be assumed that with his age, he was fully deserving of the title of a rising talent in the martial arts world in a province or county. Su Fengyin suddenly smiled and said, "If you want to fight, sure, but we have to make a small deal. As long as you help me find someone, you can choose the time and place. Also, you have the final say on who wins or loses." She hesitated for a moment, but finally nodded. Su Fengyin asked curiously, "You want that title that much?" Su Fengyin knew very well that no matter how many fortuitous encounters the woman in front of him had, due to her innate talent, reaching the great celestial phenomenon realm was already the limit of her martial arts. The martial arts journey of the mistress of Mount Hui's Great Snow Plateau could be said to be soul-stirring. First, she used the treacherous and insidious secret art to absorb other people's qi and turn it into her own, barely reaching the 1st level. If not for Su Fengyin helping to suppress her chaotic qi with the imperial seal of several countries hidden in the Tide Listening Pavilion, she would have very likely gone mad and even died. After that, she quickly crossed the Xian Finger realm and entered the celestial phenomenon realm. Wang Xianji had heavily injured her body, but in the end, she had spared her life. Otherwise, even if she received gift from Zhao Huangqiao and Lu Songtao, she would not have been able to escape the mysterious celestial phenomenon tribulation. It could be said that Xianyuan Qingfeng's path of martial arts was full of ups and downs. She could be said to be the first person after Su Fengnian. Because of this, Su Fengnian had always been very nice to this stubborn woman. It was like this in Beiliang, in the capital, and even more so when they met at Mount Hui. Today, when they met at Mount Hui, he also took the initiative to avoid her. One had to know that Deng Mao and Yalu Dongbed did not have this kind of treatment. To be more precise, Su Fengnian and Xianyuan Qingfeng could not be said to be in love. Perhaps Su Fengnian was empathizing with her because they were in the same boat, while she was most likely the one who had accumulated resentment in her heart. That was why the man and woman, who had reached the peak of martial arts the fastest in Liang, were so entangled. Although Su Fengnian had long known that Xianyuan Qingfeng was very competitive, she was already the first female martial arts alliance chief in several hundred years. Why did she still want to fight for the illusory title of #1 in the world? This was something that Su Fengnian could not understand, no matter how much he thought about it. This farce, which was all bark and no bite, made many of the spectators feel bored. This was how the world was. It was fine if one did not give hope, but the worst thing was to give hope and then disappoint. Many of the hot-tempered people of Jianghu could not help but loudly mock and ridicule, whispering malicious words. For some reason, Xianyuan Qingfeng, who had not appeared in purple for a long time, cast a sidelong glance at this group of noisy spectators. With just a glance, everyone was silent like cicadas in winter. Su Fengnian could not help but laugh. Looking at those fellows who were secretly shrinking their necks, he thought to himself that when he was roaming Jianghu and watching those high and mighty young heroes and fairies, this was probably the same scene. Afterwards, Su Fengnian and Xianyuan Qingfeng continued to climb the mountain under the guidance of Han Gui and Xianxia. They passed Meili Peak and Jiao Slope, and then Wudong's main mountain, Big Lotus Peak. Xianyuan Qingfeng was silent the entire way. When they reached the foot of Lotus Peak, she finally opened her mouth and said, Li Chuangong's two-sleeved green snake, Dong Tai's inverted Tai Yi, Gu Jiantong's thunder core, Song Yinqing's last sword move, Huang Zhentu's ninth sword, 6,000 miles, Huang Qing's 16 bodhisattvas, and Master Lu Hao's thunder pool. Before we reach the peak, tell me all of them. Seeing Su Fengnian frown, Xianyuan Qingfeng said coldly, if you have a move that you don't want to say, you can substitute it with a similar move, or a move that you created yourself is fine. Hearing that long list of names, the little Taoist child Xianxia felt as if thunder was rolling. It was too frightening. She only felt that this elder sister's appetite was really big. Su Fengnian asked in a deep voice, you want to gather the strengths of 100 schools of thought and merge them into one? You really don't want to give up on becoming a land immortal? Didn't Zhao Huangqiao remind you back then that your situation is somewhat similar to my younger brother, Huang Manor? You were lucky enough to escape the disaster of the mysterious finger heavenly phenomenon realm. If you still insist on becoming a land immortal, aren't you afraid that it will be short-lived? Xianyuan Qingfeng said indifferently, that's my business. From the beginning to the end, this person was not a likable woman. Su Fengnian smiled and said, all right, I can't teach you the two-sleeved green snake of a sheepskin for old man. In fact, I can't teach you at all in a short period of time, and I can't make the decision to teach you the peach blossom sword deity's inverted sword either. As for old Huang Saber 9, don't even think about it. However, Gu Jiantong's thunder cube, Song Yinqing's flying sword, and Lu Haoshi's thunder pool are all not a problem. Huang Qing's 16 sword point sitting Buddha is also not difficult. Other than that, I'll tell you about Tuoba Bodhisattva's unique chi circulation method, as well as the 2 trump cards of Bing Mountain's 5th raccoon and Murong Baoding. If you learn fast enough, I still have many good things. I'll take them all. This time, it was Xianyuan Qingfeng's turn to feel incredulous. He turned his head and stared at this somewhat abnormal fellow. Her eyes seemed to be saying, It's one thing for me to ask for a sky-high price, but you're even saving me money by sitting on the ground. Su Fengnian smiled and said, I'll teach you one by one, but you have to promise me one condition. In the future, when you find one or a few disciples, you have to teach them everything you know, even if it means that you don't want this bit of Jianghu to end. Then, the four of them went up the mountain. Han Gui intentionally led the little Taoist child Xianxia in front, putting a large distance between them. Su Fengnian really did tell Xianyuan Qingfeng everything he knew. He explained the essence of the world's top martial arts to Xianyuan Qingfeng. Xianyuan Qingfeng memorized everything. Occasionally, when there was something he didn't understand, he would get to the bottom of it without hesitation. He would even interrupt Su Fengnian's speech when there was a subtlety, thinking carefully before allowing him to continue. On this section of the mountain road, Su Fengnian was like a knowledgeable teacher, while Xianyuan Qingfeng was a competent disciple who diligently memorized everything. At the back of Big Lotus Peak, on the back of the White Dragon, which was only 1 li away from the peak, Han Gui, who was standing in the distance, turned his head and discovered that the two people had stopped. What happened next made this young Taoist, who was very likely to be the next Wudong sect leader, speechless. When Su Fengnian and the woman parted ways, the former kicked the latter's butt, neither lightly nor heavily. The latter was obviously angry from embarrassment, and the entire White Dragon's back was filled with killing intent. However, the young king said something, and the woman was stunned for a moment before giving up and going down the mountain. The little Taoist child, Xianxia, immediately prostrated himself in admiration. He thought that if he could also wander the Jianghu in the future, he must have at least half of the elegance of the king of Bailiang. When the three of them went up the mountain again, even Han Gui couldn't help but ask curiously, Your Highness and that woman are old acquaintances? Su Fengnian smiled and nodded. He said softly, She's an enemy we've known for many years, and kicking her was a person's dream. The little Taoist child of the Qing generation thought about it seriously. Thinking about that fairy sister's cold and elegant appearance and arrogant manner, he didn't think that person's dream was childish at all. He laughed and said, Your Highness, that kick was very awe-inspiring. I like it. Han Gui rubbed his forehead, feeling a headache. A cold snort came from far away. It scared the little Taoist child so much that he had goosebumps all over his body. Su Fengnian rubbed the child's head and said gloatingly, You're in trouble. For the next 20 years, don't go down the mountain and go to the Jianghu. The little Taoist child asked timidly, That sister, is she very powerful? Su Fengnian smiled and said, A woman who wants to be the second Wang Xinji. Don't you think she's very powerful? The little Taoist child said with a bitter face, No wonder Junior Grand Uncle always said that the woman at the foot of the mountain is a tiger. At this moment, a white-robed monk walked down from the top of the mountain, his sleeves fluttering. He looked like he was going to fight Su Fengnian to the death. Chapter 1524. Su Fengnian was a bit embarrassed by the white-clothed monk's aggressive approach. He wasn't afraid, but he couldn't help but feel a little guilty. Which father in the world wouldn't be angry at the bastard who dared to trick their own daughter? Back when Li Thing ran away from home and snuck out of the two Zen temples to roam the Jianghu, she carried around 200 taels of silver. It was probably her father's accumulated wealth from lecturing in the temples for many years. In the end, when she met the three of them, she ate and drank without restraint and quickly became penniless. Perhaps this heroine had let it slip when she returned home and bore a grudge against the white-clothed monk. Su Fengnian knew that he was in the wrong, so he could only force a smile and make up his mind not to retaliate or scold. The white-clothed monk walked quickly with large strides. There was actually a woman following behind him. She couldn't be considered very beautiful, and the makeup on her face was a bit thick. It turned out that Li Thing had hung half a kilogram of rouge on her face in Wutangan back then, because she had learned it from her family. The white-clothed monk hurriedly came in front of Su Fengnian and pointed at Su Fengnian's nose, denouncing him. Where are my daughter and my disciple Nanbei? I heard that you thought they had too many tables to eat, so you chased them to Shishu and Nanzhao. Is this how your Mount Qing Liang treats its guests? If I see that my daughter has lost a few kilograms, do you believe that I won't go to your doorstep and scold you? The woman who came to the white-clothed monk's side first smiled at Su Fengyan, then tugged at his monk robe and muttered in a small voice, "What do you mean by Ri? You have to call yourself a poor monk. How many times did Li Feng tell you after she returned to the mountain? An expert must have the bearing and demeanor of an expert." Li Feng always said that there was a swordsman who traveled the Jianghu with her. What was his name again? Old Huang? She could tell at a glance that he was an expert. Li Xiaoxin, look at yourself. Is this proper? The white-clothed monk was clearly still angry. He gave a cold snort and changed his tone slightly. Do you believe that I won't go to Mount Qingliang to scold and make a scene? It's just that this poor monk didn't bring the knife that has been sharpened countless times today. The woman seemed to have more worldly wisdom than her man. She coughed and interrupted the white-robed monk's threatening words. She turned her head to Su Fengyan and explained with a smile, "Your Highness, don't listen to this bald man's nonsense. There's no such thing as a knife. In fact, it's just something that the old abbot of our temple uses to chop firewood. The father of this thing just misses that old bald man. Oh no, he misses his master. So from time to time, he takes it out to sharpen the knife, afraid that it will rust. The old abbot did not leave anything behind, only a hatchet, a handwritten copy of the Diamond Sutra, and that big vat for washing our hands after returning from work every day. The hatchet and the sutra were still all right. We took them, but that vat was a bit heavy, so we had no choice but to leave it in the temple. Otherwise, in the future, we would have one more item for our dowry." The monk in white said helplessly, "How can you treat a water jar as your daughter's dowry?" The woman rolled her eyes and said, "How many famous people in Gangnam-do like to use the mud at the bottom of the vat to make pots? It's worth a lot of money." Su Fengyan smiled and agreed. "That's right. I once saw Jiangnan's Liu family's Minister Liu from the Ministry of Rites use a famous pot. It was made in the early years when he went to the two Zen temples to burn incense, using various methods to ask the old abbot for a few kilograms of mud." The woman immediately beamed with joy, looking at this young vassal king who did not have any heirs, more and more pleasing to the eye. That's right, that's right." Then she stared at the monk in white and said, "Speak properly. Don't injure us." Li Dongxin rubbed his bald head. Everything had its vanquisher, and the words of his wife were more effective than an imperial edict. At this time, Han Gui was finally able to get a word in. He bowed and said, "I am Han Gui from the Little Pillar Peak's Green Mountain Monastery. I have long been fascinated by monk Wu Chan." Li Dongxin looked at this Wudong Taoist who was not famous before the battle between Buddhism and Taoism. Compared to the way he treated Su Fengyan, he smiled a little more and returned the greeting. "Greetings, Shinran Han. There are 3 debates on Lotus Peak this time, and you and I will be in the 3rd debate on the last day. When the time comes, I hope Shinran Han will be merciful." Han Gui smiled and said, "I am really not worthy of being called Shinran. 2 Zen monks can just call me Taoist Han." Li Dongxin laughed and said, "Taoist is a person of the Tao, a person who has attained the Tao, a Taoist priest, a person who has proven the Tao, a Zhenren, a person who seeks the truth. It is better for me to call you Shinran Han. If Wang Zhonglo was here, I might as well call him Taoist Wang. If Hong Shixiang was standing in front of me, then I would really have to respectfully call him Taoist Hong." Han Gui smiled and did not say anything. Li Dongxin glanced at Han Gui's clear eyes and retracted his sharpness. He sighed softly. "Your Wudong and Mount Longhu are indeed different. If those yellow and purple nobles heard this, not to mention the old Taoists of the Hope generation, even those of the Ning generation would be furious and would not have peace." Han Gui said calmly, "It is not that Wudong Taoists have a longer peace of mind compared to Mount Longhu. It is just that the cultivation paths of the 2 mountains are different, but in the end, different paths lead to the same goal. My master and Master Wang are extremely respectful of Mount Longhu's old Jinren Jiao Tuan. They have invited him to Wudong to discuss the Tao. Every time he passed by Beiliang, he would never refuse because of the different sections. I have personally heard Jinren Jiao talk about the unification of the 3 sects twice and benefited greatly. The white-robed monk smiled and asked, "If I remember correctly, it was your Wudong's ancestor Lu who first advocated the unification of the three sects? Then I would like to ask, who is part of it?" Han Gui blurted out without thinking. "Ancestor Lu once said that the Tao is the same. This is the root of the unification of the three sections. In my humble opinion, I don't know what it is, but I know what it is not. It is this one. It may not be in the hands of the Wudong monks who have reached the depths of Zen, nor may it be on Mount Wudong, where Buddhism is destroyed and Taoism is flourishing. Similarly, it may not be in the mouths of those scholars who are good at talking." Li Dongxin touched his bald head again. His eyes seemed to be full of admiration. He nodded and said apologetically, "I have rudely probed you 3 times. Please don't blame me, Zhenhan." Han Gui smiled and said, "It's fine, it's fine." The group of people climbed the mountain together. The white-robed monk and Han Gui casually chatted about Wudong's local customs. There was neither Buddhism nor Taoism. It was as if they had met an old friend in a foreign land. Their words were as slippery as watermelon skin. The white-robed monk deliberately ignored Su Fengyan. He was probably afraid that he would not be able to hold back and look for a knife to chop people. If a man met someone who was trying to steal his wife, he would pick up a knife and chop the person without hesitation. If he met someone who was trying to steal his daughter, whether he would chop or not depended on not only the character of the daring little bastard, but also the attitude of the daughter's mother. At this time, Li Dongshi's mother, or rather the little monk Nanbei's master's wife, was extremely amiable towards Su Fengyan. Although it was not the gaze of a mother-in-law that would grow fonder the more she looked at her son-in-law, it was as if she had met a young man of the younger generation who was interested in her daughter. She was not deliberately warm, but she would definitely not lower her face to treat Su Fengyan. The woman's heart was boundless. At first, she was still a little reserved. After all, the young man in front of her was the #1 figure in the Northwest. But soon, success came naturally. She began to nag about family matters and complained that in Bailiang's territory, he was really spending money. Especially when she brought a lot of rouge and face powder back from Bailiang. She had already used it all. In the end, when she went to the shop in Yuzhou to take a look, the price was really expensive. Speaking of this, the woman thanked Su Fengyan very much. She said that the daughter of Li Dongshi did not know the importance of things and had accepted so many expensive gifts in one go when she left Mount Qing Liang's mansion. After that, the woman smiled and frankly said that she would never be able to pay back the money. This time, she left in a hurry and did not bring any gifts back. Therefore, she had long squandered all the savings at home. The smile on Su Fengyan's face never disappeared as he listened to the woman's blabbering. The little Taoist boy Qing Xian, who was eavesdropping on both sides, felt strange. It was strange enough that his master, a Taoist priest, could get along well with the famous white-robed monk who was known as the Bodhisattva of flesh. How could the king of Bailiang get along well with that woman? The white-robed monk Li Dongxin was the most important figure in the debate on Lotus Peak. As the current head of the 2 Zen temples, he himself was the leader of Buddhism under the heavens. Su Fengyan was also a top honor guest of Wudong. As a result, this group of people headed straight for Wudong's Xiang Palace at the top of the mountain to settle down. Wudong originally did not have the habit of dividing people into different ranks. However, very quickly, Wudong Mountain discovered that while they did not pay attention to it, the mountain visitors paid the most attention to it. It was from the mouths of the guests that the 9 palaces and 36 temples that originally belonged to Wudong Mountain's Taoism actually already had a ranking system in Jianghu. Being able to stay in the 9 palaces was something that could demonstrate one's official status and position in Jianghu the most. If one was able to enter one of the 8 upper temples of the 36 temples to rest, then it was also worth being complacent about. Following the increase in the number of visitors, especially the arrival of the 2 famous families of Jiangnan and Huainan, many of the lower 8 temples that were far from the main peak were also overcrowded, to the extent that they had no choice but to close their doors and decline visitors. Just as Su Fengyan and the white-robed monks group stepped foot into the Xiang Palace from the back door, A delicate and pretty little Taoist boy rushed in front of Su Fingyan and said in a low voice with a sad face, "Grand Marshal Uncle, a new group of honored guests have arrived on the mountain." The Taoist master personally accompanied them on a tour of our main peak. The guests are also not like the usual foreigners who make many requests. They did not insist on resting on the mountain. They said that they had already booked rooms at the small town at the foot of the mountain, but the Taoist master personally said that these guests could not be neglected. He wanted us to make 3 or 4 elegant and quiet rooms for them. My master and a few martial uncles were all worried to death. With great difficulty, they were only able to find 2 rooms in the Xiang Palace. Any more than that really could not be done. The Divine Firmament Temple and the Void Temple that are near the top of the mountain are also in a difficult position, saying that even the woodshed has been vacated for the guests to stay in. Then there's no reason for us to let half of the guests stay on the mountain and half leave the mountain, right? Chapter 1525. Su Fingyan had met most of the Taoists from both Qing and Ning generations when he was practicing his blade on the mountain. He had a photographic memory, so he asked with a smile, "Little Taoist Ninghe, who are you? Why are you so important?" The little Taoist had accompanied the ox-riding Grand Marshal Uncle to welcome the person in front of him at the mountain gate. Naturally, he knew Su Fingyan's identity. The little Taoist quickly bowed and said, "Your Highness, I heard from Marshal Uncle Qing Feng that he is a student of Shangyin Academy's Mr. Han." Su Fingyan was enlightened. He had received a spy report from Qingtsang City in Lu Province. It said that Mr. Han continued his journey west to Mount Lantau, but when he heard that there was going to be a battle between Buddhism and Taoism on Mount Wudong, he sent a few disciples back to Liangshui and met up with the Immortal of Wine, Chang Sui, who had gone to Jibei alone. The old man only brought his granddaughter, Han Guoxiu, and a few escorts to continue his journey. Su Fingyan only dared to hope that one of Han Guzi's disciples would stay in Beiyang. It would be best if it was Su Huang, a master of the art of war. If it was the carefree Sima Can, it would also be good. Su Fingyan felt a little regretful when he heard the news. If only 1 or 2 people came to Mount Wudong, they would most likely be working for Beiyang. But even Chang Sui came, it probably meant that none of them would stay in Beiyang. Su Fingyan sighed in his heart and said with a smile, "Little Taoist Ninghe, go and tell your master that this king's room will be given to these guests." This king guessed that it would not be difficult for 2 or 3 people to stay in that room. The little Taoist did not dare to say anything. Han Gui said gently, "Ninghe, just do as your highness said. Also, give Qing Xian and my room to the guests." Before Han Gui could finish, the little Taoist said loudly, "Grand Marshal Uncle, how can we do that? Little Pillar Peak is more than 10 miles away from Green Mountain Monastery and Lotus Peak. Every time Qing Xian, Marshal Uncle Qing Xian, comes to Lotus Flower Peak to play with us. No, she comes to Lotus Flower Peak to help Marshal Granduncle borrow books. She's always exhausted." The voice of the little Taoist of the Ning generation became softer and softer as he spoke. Han Gui's disciple, Qing Xian, wished she could dig a hole and hide in it. She was done for. When she returned to the Green Mountain Monastery, she would be punished to copy the classics 10 times. The white-robed monk turned to his wife and clicked his tongue. "Look at the juniors on the mountain. They're all siding with their elders. Those little baldies who play with the stupid Nanbei all want to eat and drink in our house all day long." The woman smiled and said, "You're wrong. They're clearly targeting our daughter. Usually, the little monks I see on the way to the temple are very sloppy, but every time they come to our house, which one of them doesn't wear clean monk robes that have just been washed?" The white-robed monk flew into a rage. "Is there such a thing?" The woman rolled her eyes and said, "You just found out?" The white-robed monk said angrily, "Those little baldies are asking for a beating. And the stupid Nanbei is even more stupid. If this isn't inviting a wolf into the house, then what is?" The woman said unhappily, beat them until they have an epiphany. It's better that you don't have to be the abbot who doesn't take money but only gives out money." In the end, Han Gui and the little Taoist went to stay with the Qing generation disciple of the Zhenlu Zhenren Shenyao. and Su Fingyin went to the thatched hut at the elephant pond halfway up the mountain, where he used to practice his blade. Before going down the mountain, Su Fingyin first sent the white-robed monk to the room where he stayed. Han Gui took the lead and left. At this time, everyone on Mount Wudong was extremely busy. Other than being responsible for bringing Su Fingyin to the Xiang Palace, Han Gui actually had a lot of work to do. In fact, the Taoists of all generations on the mountain knew that Han Gui was going to take on a big responsibility in the future. After all, even the old chief Wang Zhonglo said that Han Gui's Taoist heart was the most stable. Even Hong Xixiang half-jokingly said that there were many small pillars of osmanthus trees on the mountain, which was most suitable for Han Gui, who had the word osmanthus in his name to cultivate and comprehend Taoism. And the two most senior Zhenren Qinyao and Yu Xingrui of Mount Wudong today also valued Han Gui, a junior who stood aloof from worldly affairs. Su Fingyin sent him to the doorstep. After the white-robed monk pushed the door open, he suddenly turned around and asked, "Have you met my senior uncle?" Su Fingyin was stunned for a moment before he realized that he was talking about the chicken soup monk at the foot of the little rotten Tuo mountain in the western region. The old monk was the senior brother of the dragon tree holy monk. He nodded and said, "I can fight with Toba Bodhisattva and not die." Li Dongxin waved his hand. "He's already dead. Who are you trying to say nice things to?" Su Fingyin was silent and speechless. The white-robed monk sighed and said sadly, "But then again, the reason why senior uncle was able to plant the lotus in my heart was because of your appearance. Back then, when I traveled thousands of miles to the west alone, it was because senior uncle was worried. His original intention was to go to the western region to bring me back to the two Zen temples. He didn't expect that one stop would last for more than 20 years. This penniless monk's epiphany is also thanks to Martial Uncle's insights. All right, that's a separate matter. The matter of my daughter is not over yet. But for senior uncle to be able to plant the lotus, I have to thank you." Li Dongxin lowered his head and put his palms together. Su Fingyin put his palms together and gently returned the greeting. After Su Fingyin left, the white-robed monk closed the door. The woman sat on the chair and rubbed her calf. She smiled and said, "There's only one daughter. Even though the north and the south are stupid, they're already a family. Sigh, if only I had 2 daughters." Chapter 15:26. Li Xiaoxin muttered softly, "Even if I have 2 daughters, I still don't want to be this kid's father-in-law. Every time I see him, I'll chase him away with a broom." For the first time, the woman did not argue. She said softly, "When I was chatting with this child, I talked about how our family was too playful. As he chatted with me, he casually said something that was quite interesting. The general idea was that when he was young, he was truly naughty and mischievous. When he was young, he would always disdain his elders for restraining him. In the end, when he finally grew up, he suddenly realized that when he made a mistake, no one would scold him. Instead, he missed his childhood." The white-robed monk leaned back in his chair and rubbed his bald head. For some reason, he also missed the scene when he was young and would nag at his master's ear. Before Su Fingyin walked out of Xiang Palace, a spy leader from the Fu Shui chamber and a military officer whose territory was near Mount Wudong appeared together. The two of them were dressed in casual clothing, no different from normal pilgrims. They had seized this rare opportunity to report to the prince. This made Su Fingyin seem like a noble young master who had brought his servants and servants out for a trip. Today, there were no poor people in Xiang Palace. Most of them were foreigners who had deep connections with Huagai County and even the entire Bailiang officialdom. Everyone was either rich or noble. Otherwise, there were people like Su Huang and Sima Qian, who had enough confidence to look down on nobles. It was said that even the eldest son of the Hezhou provincial governor and the daughter of the Ji provincial governor had climbed the mountain together, but they were still not allowed to enter Xiang Palace. They could only stay in the Heaven Temple. Su Fingyin listened to the two's concise and respectful reports. He did not give any orders. As they neared the elephant cleansing pool, he let them do their own things. They didn't talk much, but the two of them still felt honored. Regardless of whether it was the shrewd spy or the steadfast military officer with real power, When they looked at each other and smiled, they couldn't hide the smiles on their faces. This kind of honor came from the bottom of their hearts. It was the attitude of the other officialdom officials to get close to the big shots of the officialdom, to get familiar with them. In fact, there was a world of difference. Su Fengnian revisited this place and found that the quiet and empty elephant cleansing pool of the past was extraordinarily lively. It could be said that the crowd was shoulder to shoulder. After asking, he found out that there were two people competing on the giant rock in the pool. The rules were very simple. Whoever fell from a rock into the pool would lose. Su Fengnian really could not squeeze his way to the edge of the pool. He could only stand about 50 steps away from the elephant cleansing pool. In a stream of people, there were many hawkers with bamboo chests hanging in front of their chests. They were shouting, "Watching two masters fight, how can we not drink a big cup of our Baelyang's green ant wine? Or buy 2 jugs of wine, and we'll give you a copy of the King of Baelyang's martial art quotation from Mount Wudong for free." The two masters on the giant rock in the pool were in the midst of a fierce battle. Su Fengnian's ears were filled with loud cheers. As far as the eye could see, only when the two masters leaped high in the air could he see their silhouettes. One saber, one sword. The light of the saber and the shadow of the sword reflected each other's brilliance. This was probably the so-called floating like a startled swan. Su Fengnian did not know why his interest was piqued. He bought some melon seeds and red dates from Hawker. Like most of the spectators, he stood on his tiptoes and stretched his neck, listening to the spectators beside him explain their moves in surprise. He was somewhat self-deprecating. Look at how imposing the other people were when they were fighting. The spectators were as numerous as the clouds, the cheers shaking the sky. Compared to his final confrontation with Tooba Bodhisattva in the small alley, this was countless times more awe-inspiring. That's right. It seemed like this was the Jianghu that he had dreamed of when he was young. Su Fengnian leisurely ate the melon seeds, listening to the friendly introductions that did not even charge him a single copper coin. He was very satisfied. According to the most well-informed ears around him, Su Fengnian learned that the two young warriors who were showing off their skills to their heart's content were not nameless juniors in the Jianghu. Among the new top 10 experts in the great snow plains of Mount Hui, the Jianghu talent with the famous sword, Wushu Su, was a close friend of the direct disciple of one of the grandmasters. Their relationship was a little distant. Could an ordinary cat or dog be related to the direct disciple of the new top 10 experts in the world? As for the local Baelyang youngster who used the saber, he was even more influential. It was said that even the king of Baelyang, Su Fengnian, cherished his talent, and even personally taught him 2 or 3 moves of the saber technique. Hearing this, Su Fengnian could not help but grimace even more than when he heard Miss East-West say that she had seen through old Huang's identity with just a glance. Just as Su Fengnian was feeling a little depressed, the crowd was forcibly pushed aside. Su Fengnian turned his head to look and saw 2 men walking side by side. Both of them looked solemn. One of them was holding a long sword. The other had his hands behind his back. It seemed like they were about to participate in a peak battle for the title of top 10 experts in the world. Su Fengnian could only follow the crowd around him and make way for the 2 experts. It turned out that after the battle between the 2 young warriors on the giant rock had ended, it was the turn of these 2 Jianghu heroes who were more important in the Jianghu to compete on the stage. One of them was known as the Jiangnan Plum Rain Sword, while the other was known as the Central Plains Divine Dragon. Just listen, with such a respectable nickname. How could they not be heroes? While Su Fengnian made way for the 2 heroes, he thought to himself that he did not seem to have any good nicknames. It was a little unreasonable. Back then, when the 4 of them wandered the Jianghu in poor conditions, not to mention the heroine Li East-West who gave herself a string of nicknames, the other 2 all had. Su Fengnian sighed and ate melon seeds. Not only was he depressed at the moment, but his crotch was also depressed. Chapter 1527. Su Fengnian suddenly turned around and saw a group of familiar faces. Su Huang with his beautiful beard, Sima Can, who always had a bright smile on his face, Lu Duanmao with his evil-looking face, Jean Baosher with a cold expression, and an unfamiliar middle-aged man who reeked of alcohol and carried a long sword. He should be the famous wine immortal Chong Sui. Su Huang laughed in a low voice and said, I met Taoist Han in Purple Sun Palace and heard that your highness has come to the mountain. So, I have to find your highness and thank you. What was supposed to be a harmonious and courteous conversation was completely destroyed by Chong Sui's arm around Su Fengnian's shoulder. After all, this fellow had directly put his arm around Su Fengnian's shoulder and said in a loud and careless manner, I've made a trip to North Ji, and only then did I know that not only are the infantry under Yan Wunalon's command the best in the world, even the cavalry of Yuzhou is not something that the cavalry of Li Yongbie can compare with. Originally, I thought that Mr. would not let go of his old face, so I could find an excuse, saying that I was not acclimatized to Bailiang and had to rest for 3 to 4 years. But I did not expect that Mr. would be so generous this time, even throwing Su Huang and the others to Bailiang. So, it is just nice as we can still be together. But I tried so hard, but it backfired. After we bid farewell in Jibei, it should be the last time I see Mr. in this life. If I had known this would happen, I would have followed him to Qingtsong City in Lu Province. Su Fengnian, we're going to follow you in the future. Why don't we take this opportunity to discuss something and ask for the position of general for Su Huang? Let me put it bluntly first, a position with an unknown title is not going to work. Even if you can't be a general with real power in the border of Liang Province, you can still do it in Lu Province and Yuzhou. With my junior brother Su's full of military strategies, it is more than enough for him to lead an army of 10,000 men. That brat Sima can stay in the Liangzhou provincial governor's office as a 4th or 5th rank official. If you're a little bolder, you might as well shove him to Song Dongming as an assistant. However, you must be careful of this brat seducing the pretty maidservants of your Qingliang mountain. This brat's biggest problem is that he can't control the bird in his pants. As for junior brother Lu Duanmao and junior sister Jean Baosher, you don't have to worry. If there is no official hat for them, they could just find a place to train for a year and a half. Su Huang's face was full of helplessness. Sima Can's bright smile became forced, while Lu Duanmao simply turned his head and pretended that he did not know this senior brother. Jean Baosher secretly glanced at Su Fengnian with a complicated expression. Since old Mr. Han was so generous, Su Fengnian, who was extremely surprised, was not a petty person. He immediately showed the swift and decisive side of a vassal king and said in a deep voice, Mr. Su can go to the Huayang Pass Protectorate Office first. I will personally write a letter to Chu Lushan. The military affairs in Bailiang's border have always been strict. To be honest, Su Fengnian, dare not guarantee that Mr. Su can immediately become a general in Liang Province. But I will definitely not let Mr. Su use a sledgehammer to crack a nut. Mr. Sima, you can go straight to Qingliang Mountain and assist Deputy Administrator Song Dongming. Of course, if you don't like being an assistant, you can also go to Liang Province's Provincial Governor Office or Lingzhou's Taiyu County. Right now, there is a merit officer position in the Provincial Governor Office, while Lingzhou's Taiyu County has just vacated a governor. They are both 4th rank officials. It depends on how Mr. Sima weighs it. As for Mr. Liu, I hope that you can go to Lingzhou to help Provincial Governor Su Beiji. Perhaps your position will not be high at the beginning, but I believe that with Mr. Liu's knowledge and Su Beiji's foresight, Mr. Liu will quickly stand out. As for Miss Jean, I really haven't thought of a plan yet. Let me think about it, but before I go down the mountain, no matter what, I will give Miss Jean a satisfactory answer. When Su Fengnian finished speaking, Sima Can and Lu Duanmao looked at each other in dismay. Even Su Huang was shocked. Jean Baosher pursed his lips tightly and was in high spirits. Only Chong Sui still looked sloppy. He lazily picked up his wine gourd and drank a mouthful of wine. He wiped his mouth and smiled. Great, Su Fengnian said sincerely. Su Fengnian, will of course welcome all of you to stay in Bailiang. My second sister will also be very happy. Chong Sui sighed softly. Then, other than the eldest apprentice brother who has a grudge with the Su family, and the youngest apprentice brother who has no choice but to stand against you, you have a total of 8 disciples. Currently, 6 of us are working together in Bailiang. Life and death are fated. Riches and honor are in the hands of the heavens. People come and go as they please. The 6 of us are already considered lucky. Chang Sui's last sentence was clearly said to his junior apprentice brother Lu Duanmao, who still had a knot in his heart. Among the 8 of them, Lu Duanmao had the best personal relationship with Prince Zhao Kai. Lu Duanmao turned a deaf ear. Next, Chang Sui suggested that they get together to taste the most authentic green ant wine in the world. Su Fingyin took out all of his silver and bought more than 10 bottles of wine from a vendor. Then, he led them to a nearby, thatched cottage. The cottage was cleaned all year round. Although no one lived in it, it did not look decadent at all. Even the small vegetable garden behind the cottage was full of greenery. Su Fingyin moved out bamboo chairs and stools from the cottage with great familiarity. He even took out a table that was originally used to store books. The thatched cottage was not far from the elephant washing pond, but the contrast between the two was clear. This had a lot to do with Mount Wudong's intention. The group of people sat around the table in the open space in front of the cottage. Chang Sui had already begun to drink to his heart's content. Su Huang and Lu Duanmao sat side by side. Jean Baosher sat across from Chang Sui, diagonally across from Su Fingyin. Naturally, Su Huang and Su Fingyin talked about the naval battle of Guangling. When they met in Liuzhou, regarding the fact that it was just a civil war that belonged to the Guangling Navy, the two of them each had their own opinions. Just as Sir Han had said, the two of them each had their own opinions. Su Huang guessed half correctly that it was a quick battle, while Su Fingyin guessed correctly that West Chu had won the battle. As for the following situation in Guangling, Su Fingyin and Su Huang had a dispute. Su Huang, a master of the art of war who had traveled through the old West Chu several times, firmly believed that Liang would quickly form an encirclement, and West Chu's breakthrough point would inevitably be the seemingly unstoppable 100,000 elites from Nanjiang. Only by doing this could they truly gain strategic depth for West Chu and gain a firm foothold in the gap between Xianxia and Nanjiang, and truly display the advantages of the Guangling River as a natural barrier. Although in this way, it would still be difficult to escape the predicament of being pincered by Lu Xingxiang and the Prince of Yan, but compared to desperately defending a corner of West Chu's capital city and only being destined to be nibbled away bit by the Liang imperial court, the situation was still much better. For this reason, Su Fingyin specially dug out a geomancy map of the Guangling Road from his room and slowly spread it out on the table. Su Huang held a wine cup in one hand and used the other to point out the mountains and rivers. He spoke tirelessly. Landscape painting emphasizes power, and when martial artists exchange blows, they also emphasize power. Then, West Chu's power almost reached its peak after Xie defeated Yang Xinxing and Yin Jinchuan on the western front. Ko Jianghuai displayed his brilliance on the eastern front, and Chao Chongqing stabilized the Guangling River in one battle. However, Su Huang filled his half-empty wine cup to the brim and then pointed to the wine bottle by his hand. No matter how powerful West Chu's power is, it is still only a cup of wine. But Liang's power is as big as a wine bottle. Yang Xinxing's Jizhou infantry suffered a lot of casualties. Yin Jinchuan's cavalry was wiped out in one battle, and even Guangling Prince Zhao Yi's navy was completely wiped out. But the wine in the bottle is still more than the wine in this cup, a lot more. And this is just us talking about the military on paper, talking about the number of troops. The real general trend of Liang is that after the new emperor ascended the throne, the people of Liang are still stable, so much so that it can be said that they are becoming more and more stable. The Yong Hui auspicious talisman is far less turbulent than what outsiders imagine. Therefore, in the Battle of West Chu in Liang, the former can succeed in one battle, while the latter can only lose one battle. Su Huang pointed to a strategic town on the north bank of Guangling River and a pass in Jianzhou on the south bank. He said in a deep voice, "If I were Chao Chongqing, when the old General Wu Zhongshuan leads half of the Nanjiang army to cross the river, I would send a valiant general who dares to fight a tough battle and 10,000 elite troops south to cut off their retreat. Then, I would send a veteran general who is good at defense to guard the western front door, so that the Nanjiang army of 100,000 can neither fight nor retreat comfortably." Su Fingyin bent over slightly to look at the map, frowned, and said softly, "The deputy commander of Belyang's infantry great ancestor Gu, has mentioned Wu Zhongshuan, this veteran general. He thinks that this person's command of the army is far above Yang Xinxing and Yin Jinchuan. He also has many valiant generals under his command. Wu Zhongshuan will definitely keep an eye on his rear if he has to travel a long distance to fight in a foreign land. Su Huang shot a glance at Sima Can, who was sitting cross-legged and munching on melon seeds. The latter resentfully put down the handful of melon seeds in his hand and sat upright. He said, Wu Zhongshuan and the group of meritorious generals by his side are all experienced men who have fought many battles. They would not be so careless. However, according to military books, it is said that they do not transport grain for 1,000 miles. This is a hidden danger of the Southern Border Army. More importantly, it is a fatal flaw that is not something that Wu Zhongshuan and the others can solve. That is, no matter how hot-blooded and passionate the battle on the battlefield is, it has always been a silent ripple of the battle in the imperial court. Since the late emperor of Liang, no one has trusted the prince of Yanxi, Zhaobing. The current emperor is no exception. Isn't it using northern Meng to cut down the 300,000 cavalry of northern Liang's territory, and using western Shu to cut down the 200,000 ferocious troops of southern border's territory? If Wu Zhongshuan easily took West Shu, wouldn't the officials of Great Peace City be afraid of the 100 to 200,000 southern barbarians? If they had nothing to do, they would run right under their noses to show off their might. Chapter 1528. Sima couldn't help but secretly pick up a handful of melon seeds from the table again. While eating melon seeds, he said vaguely, Beiliang's transport is trapped, and the 100,000 troops in Nanjiang are not really comfortable. Therefore, in this battle, if Wu Zhongshuan was able to defeat Chao Zhangqing, that would be because he had the ability to reach the heavens. During this period of time, the imperial court would definitely make a move. It was the same logic as when Yin Jinchuan had no choice but to tacitly understand and take the risk to advance. Liang Imperial Court is the happiest when the battle reaches a stalemate. If they lose, they will be reorganized by Lu Xianxia, the commander-in-chief of the southern expedition. Not a single soldier will be able to return to Nanjiang. Maybe even Wu Zhongshuan will have to enter the capital to be an official. Didn't Tangxi Sword Wiz Liu Baijie just get demoted from the position of Minister of War to the position of Administrator? Won't Wu Zhongshuan be moved? Don't you want to compete with the newly appointed Assistant Minister of War, Tang Taizhuang? You are young, and your military achievements are not that good. You're not as famous as me. What right do you have to compete with me for the position? Besides, didn't Taiyan City say that a civil official who doesn't want to be the Grand Secretary is not a good civil official? A general who doesn't want to be the Minister of War is not a good general. Jean Bauscher stepped heavily on the guy's foot under the table. Sima was obviously a person who had been tortured. His expression didn't change, but he was finally not so cynical. Although the imperial court of Liang is domineering, watching the battle of Liangmang from the other side, personally fighting with the rebels of West Shu, and deliberately playing tricks with the vassals of the older generation, I have to say that the late emperor of Liang is really a powerful monarch. If you look at the history books, if you don't talk about the military achievements, he should be in the top 5. Let's not talk about other things. Let's just talk about the general trend of removing vassals. Let's not talk about Beiliang. That Zhao Ying, the Duke of Huainan, went to the battlefield and died, right? Zhao Sui, the Duke of Jiaodong, has been guarding the door of the northeast for so many years, right? Zhao Sun, the hereditary king of Jing, also wished he could pour out his heart to the imperial court and carve the word loyalty on his forehead, right? That was why it was said that in a history book of the spring and autumn annals, it was about generals from various countries appearing on stage. Emperors and civil officials were all written to the side. Every page was filled with the words martial artists save the country. As for the spring of eternal Hui, it was replaced with the words literati rule the country. With Zhang Jiulu leading the charge and the 5 ministers outside of the Ministry of War working together, it was truly a magnificent sight. Even 1,000 years later, as long as you are a scholar, you will feel proud of this glorious history. Sima can suddenly paused and looked around like a storyteller who was keeping people in suspense. He took a sip of wine and said, "Then, here's the problem. Why is it that on the surface, the longer Liang drags on, the greater the chance of victory, while Beimeng drags on, the smaller the chance of victory? Why is it that Xindi still insists on having Guangling Road burn, and then let Beimeng feel that they have a chance to invade the south at this time? Fighting on two fronts, aren't you afraid that even the thickest of assets will be squandered?" Chang Sui was overjoyed and pointed at his shitty with his wine gourd. "In the future, if you can't make a name for yourself in Beiliang, then go to the restaurant and be a storyteller. Shi Xiang, I will set up the stage for you. Jean Shimi will take the money." Su Fengyan smiled and gave the answer. For the elite troops in the world, it is already the limit to maintain their prosperity for 20 to 30 years. After that, they will only get worse and worse, and their shortcomings will gradually increase. Our Beiliang cavalry started in the spring and autumn annals, and now it has been 30 years. First, Great Peace City is afraid that our Beiliang frontier army will not be able to fight Beimeng as time passes. Second, they're afraid that our Su Fengyan will have ill intentions after he stabilizes his position and grasps power. A very simple example. If my father had said in the past that he wanted to divide the river with the Zhao family, at least half of the soldiers would have left and the morale of the army would have fallen. But if it was during the last years of Yonghui, Su Xiao, who was deeply rooted in Beiliang, mentioned this, the 300,000 cavalry would all be old people rooted in Beiliang. Not many people would leave. When our Su Fengyan truly holds power for 4 to 5 years and has all the generals of the border army in his hands, Beiliang, who has never had a good impression of Great Peace City, would not point their spear at Liang. It'll be normal in the eyes of Jing for them to establish their own country on the northwest border, right? Chang Sui laughed and said, "That's human nature." Sima can asked with a smile, "Wang Yi, have you really not thought about this?" Su Fengyan shook his head, not saying anything. Chang Sui finally opened his mouth to talk about serious matters. With hazy, drunken eyes, he said, "When it comes to the various armies in the world, there are actually not many that can be called heroic. My old foundation is the Southern Ji infantry of the Northern Han Imperial Guard, which has already been ruined by Yang Xinxing. Yan Zhenxuan's cavalry was originally one of the best elite cavalry in Liang. Unfortunately, the old general died a sullen death and did not die in battle. Now, the number of soldiers left can be counted on one hand. The newly appointed administrator of Huainan, Kainan, has expanded from 60,000 to 80,000, and her military strength has decreased by quite a bit. The Minister of War, Tang Taizhuang, has single-handedly trained the elite cavalry of Liaodong's Duoyan, which is extraordinary. The Blackwater cavalry of the vassal prince of Liaoxi, Zhao Sui, is also not bad. Wu Zhongshuan's great armor of the southern frontier is said to be able to compete with Yin Wunluan's Yuzhou infantry. The king of Yin, Zhao Bing, personally leads the 40,000 Wufeng army. As for the navy, the Guangling navy has been split into two, so there is no need to mention it. The Qingzhou navy has long been corrupted by the officials of the Green Party. If they can fight with words, they will probably be invincible, no matter how you look at it. Only your northern Liang border army has been able to maintain its sharpness for a full 30 years. Chang Sui stood up and said slowly, "In the Central Plains, relying on natural barriers and cities will definitely not be able to stop Beimeng's iron hooves. Therefore, I want to stand here in the only Beiliang frontier army that can withstand the disadvantage of numbers and not take a step back. I want to use my meager strength to block for the Central Plains." Chang Sui raised his head and drank half of the gourd of wine. At the mouth of the gourd in Yuzhou, there are 2 cities and hundreds of fortresses. When Beimeng's hooves advance, it will only be after the Beiliang's defenders are all dead. Chang Sui muttered to himself, "Before I personally went to the border, I always felt that it was grand and majestic when I wrote poems after getting drunk. Only now do I know that the true border of 100 battles is not at all as heroic as the scholars imagined."